Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Avon Advisory Planning Commission meeting. If you are interested in having a copy of the agenda or the staff reports, they are available on the tables to the right of the audience. We will be conducting business as outlined on the agenda. From time to time, the board may deviate from the agenda. As president of this body, I will inform those in attendance of any deviations. This meeting is being recorded for the public record. Because of this, we request that personal conversations are kept to a minimum and all cell phones are set to vibrate with any phone calls taken outside of the chambers. This would be a good time to pull your phones out. If you are interested in commenting during the public hearing, please sign up on the sheets located on the tables to the right of the audience. When your name is called, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Please address your comments to the board and not to the staff or to the petitioner. Your comments should relate directly to the case at hand. Responses to public comments will be given once the hearing is closed. We do understand that there may be several persons who wish to speak. In order to keep the meeting running in a timely fashion, we would request that you not repeat previous comments. Thank you for your assistance in facilitating a respectful, fair, and timely meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's get started. Call to order.
Catherine Rander.
Present.
Robert Pope.
Present.
Mason Pike.
Present.
Dave Kaufman.
Present.
Harold Heiser.
Present.
Greg Zuzen.
Present.
Paul Guggenberger.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Very good. Let's move on to the approval of the meeting minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the previous meeting minutes? And are there any proposed changes or suggestions?
I make a motion to approve as presented.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Shall we take a
Catherine Ransberg.
approve or four?
Robert Pope.
4.
Mason Pike.
4.
Dave Kaufman.
4.
Harold Heiser.
4.
Greg Zuzen.
4.
Paul Guggenberger.
4.
Motion carries.
Okay. Mr. Peoples, are there any continuances or requests for agenda modifications?
No.
All right, then let's get right to it. This is the opportunity for public comment for items on the agenda that are not on tonight's agenda. You may comment on items on the agenda that are not a public hearing or on a specific matter that is within the council's jurisdiction. Is there anybody who would like to speak about anything that is not on tonight's agenda? Do we have anybody signed up? Okay, very good. Okay, first item is under old business. Mr. Peoples.
PUD P 2202, Cityscape Avon. The request for approval of initial planned unit development for the Cityscape residential development featuring approximately 300 attached multifamily homes contained within 17 acres, as well as one commercial 1.1 acre outlot. Properties located near the intersection of Ronald Reagan Parkway with Veterans Drive and is on the east side of Ronald Reagan Parkway. As indicated, this is the initial review of a planned unit development. So the rezoning phase, essentially, of a planned unit development. So the commission's responsibility here is to provide a recommendation for the council. The history associated with this in Hendricks County, the property was zoned to planned unit development back before it was annexed into the town. When it was annexed in 2015, It was rezoned under ZA 1502 to C3. That original rezoning also included the property to the west of Ronald Reagan, and that property to the rest west of Ronald Reagan that's under development currently was zoned I3. This is the site right here. It's got a little cutout here for a single-family dwelling, but there's single-family dwellings on this side. This is a emerging industrial development, and then down south of it, there is also emerging industrial with residential and a vacant land zone C1 at that on that corner right there. This is a conceptual plan of the planned unit development showing the multifamily piece right here and the 1.1 acre parcel right there for future commercial development. A summary of the staff report, the 2017 future land use cluster map shows the site or designates the site for innovation. And innovation is the land use category that's designated to support programming to entrepreneurs and businesses that encourage future potential for high investment, growth, and high wage opportunities. It's essentially an industrial, commercial, or office recommendation that encourages sort of startup businesses. The site is also in the Ronald Reagan Corridor Master Plan, and that proposes flex tenant space for the site, which is also another office, retail, or light manufacturing land use. The request is primarily intended to develop about 16 acres for a 304-unit apartment complex. This would provide for a gross density of just over 17 units an acre. The site adjoins legacy single-family lots and undeveloped property to the north, emerging industrial development to the west and south, and a single-family residential subdivision to the east. The site would be a good site for a transitional land use, and the property is currently zoned C3, which is the transitional commercial district for that purpose. The site does have a number of significant environmental concerns and constraints that make development of the property challenging, and that could be conducive to establishing, say, multifamily on the property, since multifamily is more flexible and can often be designed around those environmental constraints. But the recommendation of the plan is really for either office, industrial, commercial land uses. And this request for multifamily, at least the balance of the request, isn't consistent with that recommendation. The emerging development pattern in the area is largely industrial, and locating a residential use in this area could produce some sort of chilling effect on properties within a reasonable proximity to the site that would discourage additional conversion from the open space and legacy single-family residential uses that exist near the property to industrial as the plan envisions. And finally, staff's really not convinced that the plan meets the stated purposes of the plan unit development district. It is largely a multifamily residential complex that could be built somewhere close to the R5 zoning classification, with the exception of one acre lot on the property for commercial purposes. For that reason, we do recommend that the Plan Commission send an unfavorable recommendation to the Town Council, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Peebles, in your report, and thank you again, our staff does a wonderful job of putting together these reports, and we always appreciate that. In your report, you suggested that the outlot remaining C3 and the remainder being zoned R5. Can you discuss that a bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, the property is zoned C3 right now, which is a transitional land use. It's almost as if that this property could be developed if you just rezone the balance of the property to R5 for a multifamily residential complex, and you either leave that 1.1 acre property C3 or rezone that one to C2. I don't know if there's really anything with this petition other than the environmental constraints of the site. There are some significant environmental constraints of the site that would justify the use of the plan unit development district for development of the property.
So the primary objection then, if I'm reading this correctly, would be the petitioner's desire to use the PUD district.
I think from
rezoning?
the staff's, the primary way we're shaded on this site is the comprehensive plan recommendation. Because the comprehensive plan recommendation is for commercial, industrial, some sort of incubator for small businesses and not for a multifamily residential property.
Okay.
You would sort of expect like a housing recommendation of some sort for multifamily.
So question on the details of the PUD wasn't in our packet. Was it, as far as like, what is different that they're asking for in the PUD? Is it just basically all they want is to have the ability to do commercial and residential?
Yeah.
Did they not have any changes to the ordinances that would govern that then?
They did. I mean, they submitted an ordinance with the packet. It probably went out in the previous, because this is the second time it was scheduled for hearing.
Okay.
And so the ordinance probably went to you in the previous packet.
Okay.
Bill, you touched on this a moment ago. How would a PUD, you mentioned some potential environmental restraints or constraints. How would a PUD facilitate or help with that?
Well, usually with a plan unit development, if you have some significant environmental constraints, it allows you to design around them, but still get the same sort of development densities and those sorts of things as you would. You know, if you've got a significant portion of the property that is in some sort of environmental constraint, and you can use the plan unit development to design around that and still get the same sort of density as you would on the property and setbacks. You can amend a lot of the setbacks and other sorts of things to accommodate the development and preserve those environmental issues. In this particular case, it's a large sort of drainage system that goes right down the middle of the property.
And in the case of if it was rezoned R5, would they not have the same flexibility in that situation? Would they need to seek waivers to those?
They would probably need to get some variances maybe to do it, because they'd probably run into some constraints with the environmental, the drainage way that goes right down the middle of the property. There's probably some wetlands issues and other sorts of things. This PUD does allow them to design around those issues. Yeah.
My comments are similar. I mean, I think the environmental issue will be there if it's this petitioner or somebody else. It's not going to go away. And I think within our packet, we were provided a schematic of where that environmental, what they call it, Dead Creek, or Dead Run Creek is the body of water that flows through there. And so it appears as if it would be difficult for commercial industrial to be built there because of that reasoning. Now, I have visited a couple of the sites of the petitioner, and I've seen how they've used the environmental on some of those sites more as an aesthetic for the people that live there. So I kind of look at that as a positive. The one thing that I do question, though, is the reasoning for the PUD. And if we go with the R5 zoning and we still give them the C3 for the outlot, there may be variances that need to be asked for. I don't know what those are, but that's what I look at. Because again, the environmental is going to go with the land. It doesn't matter who it is today, tomorrow, or the next time. It's still going to be there and be part of our conversation.
Yeah, the petitioner has submitted two studies that show, one of them shows the difficulty of developing the property, and the one that I left, it was actually submitted after the packets went out, so I left it at your tables, and I think I emailed it to you all as well. Shows a conceptual plan for an industrial development that's designed around the environmental constraints of the property.
Any further questions for staff?
I've got a couple here for you, Bill. So it's said in your note, I just want to ask this to make sure your findings is that it does not meet the comp plan, or comp plan calls for innovation in that area. This is obviously not an innovative product.
Yep.
The second one is the current conditions, the character, the structures around it. We've got largely industrial, more or less completely surrounding it.
Emerging industrial, yeah, the property across the street's under development. The property to the south, at least fairly close to the south, is the Rise development that hasn't started construction yet. You've just approved that within the last couple months. So and there's a lot of industrial development, obviously coming from the south to the north through Plainfield.
My opinion, it does not seem to fit with the surrounding characters, what I'm trying to get at. And I'm trying to pull that out of that staff report. I agree with that staff report. The other one, the last one I want to bring up was the most desirable use. Obviously transition, it's in our comp plan. It's a transitional point. Would this development actually meet that? Or is there another development that could potentially meet that?
If we were looking solely from the standpoint of transition from the single family to the north and to the east through this site to the industrial along Ronald Reagan Parkway, multifamily is one of the land uses that is typically considered a good transitional use between those uses. So from a strictly transitional standpoint, multifamily residential, office uses, churches, schools, those types of uses that are generally compatible with single family residential, but and also with industrial, it would be considered an appropriate transitional use.
That's all for me. Thank you.
So that, I guess, kind of circles back to the east, we've got legacy residential, and then to the north and south and across the street, we have emerging industrial and commercial. So can you talk a little bit again about why this would not be a good are you thinking that in the report it said something about putting this in here would make it more difficult to put in industrial and commercial, and are you implying that the people that live in that would then object to
No, I think that citing industrial facilities sometimes looks at the proximity of residential, especially like multifamily residential. It in my experience anyway, it's been, if there's a lot of residential, it makes it more difficult to get that approved, like an industrial development up against a single-family residential development. I'm not talking about one that's already zoned, but rezoning it, and not necessarily just because it's the proximity to residential and maybe an increased remonstrance. It's just difficult to do.
And you don't think it would be any different than the challenges that they would meet building right next to the pre-existing residential?
Well, with the exception of the one single-family residence that's going to be surrounded by this development, that existing single-family is separated by a public street, 1050.
Okay.
And so it's across the street from a public street. And so I think the argument could be made almost that the street provides an adequate transition or buffer to this property just because it's one of our collector streets. It's actually under the jurisdiction of Plainfield, but it would be considered a collector in our thoroughfare plan.
Okay. Any further questions for staff? Okay, let's have the petitioner come forward.
Thank you, and Good evening, Chairperson Brandsburg, members of the commission. Joe Calderon, 11 South Meridian, Indianapolis, representing Cityscape Residential. This is Evan Bryant with Cityscape. I'm going to just make sure you have a copy of the ordinance that we have tendered, just for your review in case it didn't make it into your most current packet. We will run through a PowerPoint that we prepared for you this evening as well. So we appreciate certainly your planning staff's diligence throughout this process. We actually met with Bill last Christmas time before we kicked off, and we knew that you all were working on your new UDO, and we've talked to some others at the town, and we've been through TAC, and we've had a neighborhood meeting, and we feel pretty confident that our plan makes a lot of planning sense and a lot of practical sense given this site. So we'll run through the PowerPoint. Where do I point this? Right over here. Okay. Probably through me. The right button. Forward it. Oh, there we go. Was that me or was that you?
That's him.
Yeah, it always is.
Can we just manually? Is that okay if we tell you when to move?
Clicking it, it's.
Well, we actually have hard copies if it's frozen. Luckily, I'm old and still print off everything. I'll hand these out just to keep things moving.
In case we need it. Thank you.
Are we frozen?
Yeah, it's frozen.
Okay, I've got hard copies. We want to keep things moving.
delayed.
Oh, there's a delay.
Delay from the remote or delay
I
from?
think it's set up to transition with the delay, a 3-second delay. We're gonna try to reduce it and see if that works.
Well, let's go ahead and get started, at least on some introductory matters. I wanted Evan Bryant to come up and talk a little bit about Cityscape. They are a local developer headed by two gentlemen who have many, many years of experience. They specialize in luxury, multifamily. They developed all around. Very close, they have a project in Plainfield where we hosted our neighborhood meeting a couple of months ago. And they look at this site and the community is very desirable. So I'll turn it over to Evan and you can talk a little bit about Cityscape.
Yeah, sure. Evan Bryant, I'm the Director of Land Acquisition at Cityscape Residential. Thanks for having us tonight. Just a second to see if the slide deck working. I can go ahead and just talk about a few projects as examples, just kind of give a feel of our communities. As Joe mentioned, we built in Hendricks County the Ascent down in Plainfield, where we held our neighborhood meeting. Again, similar 300 unit Class A multifamily project. That is what Cityscape does. We only build Class A luxury multifamily. We've been been doing it for 30 years in Indianapolis. You may know some of our other projects. We recently built Aria out in Zionsville. That was completed back in 2019. We just finished construction over at Fort Benning, the Otis, and we're currently finishing up construction up in Noblesville. We actually did 50% occupancy today on that project. We also are working together on a project up in Carmel near Market District Bridges. We hope to break ground hopefully November of this year. Very similar again, Class A, luxury multifamily. I think Avon is a perfect place for us to be. We love this location on the Ronald Reagan, and I'll let Joe tell you about the rest of it.
So it looks like some of these reference projects are found on pages 3 and 4 of the hard copy, and actually had made it up to the screen. So as for this site, which is really paramount for us to explain why we picked this site, why we think it works, why we think you should think it works from a planning standpoint and a community standpoint. Bill's already mentioned the site constraints that are in play with significant wetlands, a stream running through that cuts right through the middle of the property. We've heard a lot about the comprehensive plan and the desire to develop this as commercial or industrial. And we certainly respect that. I've had the privilege of working on a number of industrial projects in this county along the Reagan. We get it. It's proximate to the airport, all of those things. But you also need support for the businesses that you're recruiting to town. And that's why we think this is an important property and very attractive for multifamily. A lot of the innovation district entrepreneurs start out working from home. This project will help facilitate that. We know that within this community there is market demand for Class A multifamily. And we think the same things that are important for businesses are important for multifamily: excellent access, including New Veterans Drive, Reagan, obviously, all come into play in why we think this works for our proposal. We understand certainly a couple of things just environmentally related that make it very difficult for industrial, and that's why we actually went to the experts to have an industrial project laid out. We know that a lot of the emphasis on recruiting industrial to Hendricks County, and certainly here and in Brownsburg, is to capture that 3% tax base. And 200,000 feet of industrial doesn't come close to what we're proposing in terms of the economic impact or the taxes that would be generated. We've got a specific slide for that. So let's get into the next slide. Project summary, good. Did I actually do that? Or did
No, we didn't.
Okay, thanks.
We're doing it here. We're doing it straight from the,
I appreciate it.
we're not showing it as a slide deck. We're just clicking on them as you bring them up.
As Bill mentioned, we are proposing, we've got 304 units, 4 stories. This would all be studios, 1s and 2s. This is not a 3 and 4 bedroom family type community, so it'd be minimal impact to the school system. This would be on 17 acres, so we are under the R5 max density. In that regard, we do have an outlot that we think is meaningful, and we put it up front, fronting on the Reagan rather than tucking it in the back to make it more meaningful and marketable. We have garage spaces, surface spaces, we've got plenty of parking, and we have projected rents that would start at $1,250 and run to $1,800 plus. As Bill has mentioned, this is already Zone C3, so it could be developed commercially as we speak. It just hasn't. It's been a tough site, and I'm not sure that 18 acres of commercial would be viable given the environment that has afflicted commercial the last couple of years with remote work and things of that nature, and certainly the challenges of retail. This would be a 2024 completion and opening, so it will take some time. Next slide, Dan. When we talked to some of the town leaders, we talked about community amenities that would be important. We want this to be just like any upscale subdivision and have not only things within the community, but access for folks to be able to have the business center, fitness center, conference rooms, pickleball, dog parks are big. We've got a whole list of items that would be amenities within the project. Within each unit, these are upgrades, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. Every unit has washer dryer, luxury vinyl plank flooring, ground molding, things of that nature. So this is not an insignificant amenity package, both inside the units and inside the community. The overall investment's over $50 million. Next slide. We've talked about some of the site opportunities. The reality is that we're facing that, as Mr. Zuzan said, any developer would face. We can't get rid of the creek and we can't get rid of the wetlands unless you go in some really sophisticated wetlands mitigation banking type program, which is almost impossible to do. And we don't think that it's necessarily appropriate. We look at that natural area where the creek runs through the middle of the property, the trees and the wetlands areas as amenity areas. And we can work around those to turn those into actual features of the project versus challenges, which would be definitely in play for a larger box type operator. We've done soil testing. That's another reason why it would be very difficult to put kind of load bearing an industrial building, and the cost in so doing might frankly scare away an industrial project. Next slide, please. This is kind of an aerial. We know the industrial building is going up across the street to the west. This is oriented south to north, with the Reagan kind of splitting the industrial. You can see 1050 just to our west, as well as the subdivision that is there. There is no industrial going in north of us at this time that I'm aware of. I think the RISE project is a parcel or a couple of parcels south. But if you look at the proximity of the residences to the east of us, you can see a couple of things. One, does it make sense if 1050 is going to be an access point, have truck traffic on 1050? And one of the things that we say, and we'll summarize this, is we don't think we're going to be incompatible with the existing infrastructure. Absolutely, trucks can go up and down the Reagan. But we also have 1050 and we have 100, where it might be a little bit more challenging, frankly, for semi-traffic. And the way you'd have to orient the industrial, in all likelihood, you'd have to have truck docks that would be facing the residences. You can't have it facing the Reagan, of course. And that might be a bit of a problem. You can see that we may have one or two neighbors, but we really don't have a lot of remonstrance that multifamily sometimes generates in communities. And that's because this is a location that we think makes sense, even considering the legacy single-family residential. Next slide. I'm going to have Evan just walk you through the site plan just for a minute or two, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Sure, so we put a lot of effort into contemplating this site plan with the existing wetlands. As I've mentioned before, as Joe has mentioned, we want to take advantage of it. It's a challenge, but we think it can also be an opportunity. So we've situated the amenity center, the pool, pickleball courts, many of the unit balconies around the creek on the property. We try to take advantage of the view, similar to what we did down in Plainfield, our project, the Ascent. We have 2 points of access, one at 1050, but I think the main point of access would be on the new Veterans Drive, pushing most traffic out of Ronald Reagan. We do have 6 buildings. One reason why we did ask for the PUD, and we have a slide to discuss more, our building sizes, as far as unit numbers, are larger. They're 45 and 62 unit buildings. This is to incorporate 4 stories and elevators. I don't believe there's any elevator product right now existing in Avon. It's a huge amenity for our residents. I think really amps us up to a different level as far as luxury. But again, we take advantage of the creeks, pretty good access all the way around the property. The dog park, again on the creek. Again, there's just a lot of really cool stuff at this property that I think multifamily really is situated to use.
Thank you. You'll notice the white box that runs off 1050 that's kind of in the middle of the project. That parcel's not included, and the owners of that property are here, and we'll let them speak and respond accordingly. I know Evan has worked with them to try to talk about a way to either make them happy with buffering, which we've shown certainly to the west. We don't have any buildings, to the north. We don't have any building abutting them on the south side. So we can't ignore the fact that there is a parcel that's not part of this, and we'll let those folks speak and we'll respond in kind. But we do buffer to the north where there is a building that would still meet buffer yards and setbacks. And you can see the commercial outlet kind of fronting on Veterans and the Reagan. So we didn't tuck it behind. So it will be a meaningful opportunity, we think, for either a small shop building or single user. Next slide, please. Bill's already talked a little bit about your land use mapping, the innovation district. We certainly respect that. We think that we are feeding in to support innovation with this project, even though it's a largely a multifamily project. Next slide. Cityscape actually has a project at the University of Kentucky that is within their innovation district. That is substantially the same type of goal in the district in Kentucky in terms of wanting to create an environment to encourage entrepreneurship. You can see the quote of the Cold Stream Research Campus Executive Director on the slide. Multifamily housing will allow for the creation of a dynamic live, work, play, learn environment by providing the social infrastructure necessary to drive the development of office and research development facilities. So as we mentioned, we think that this is very supportive of your innovation district, even though we're not producing necessarily goods from the multifamily component. Next slide. Why PUD? Again, as Bill mentioned, we believe the site constraints are such that doing one individual zoning district is not viable. Witness the fact that we've got C3 covering the whole site, and it's despite development all around it, there's nothing that has been proposed for this site. We do have 2 separate land uses within our PUD, which are separate and distinct, but they will share infrastructure. So that is another hallmark of the PUD. We think that we can work with the site constraints to incorporate them, preserve the environment. We do not believe that this site necessarily fits within any single district, particularly if you like the concept of multifamily. We cannot meet all of the standards of R5. Evan mentioned the fact that there is a limitation on the number of units in the per building. We can't meet that, even though we do meet the density of R5. It's because we've had to kind of work around and scatter our buildings around the infrastructure. Plus, since the Ronald Reagan is a limited access highway, we have no realistic opportunity to have 3 access points. Next slide. This is a very important part of why we think our proposal checks a lot of the boxes that you as the planning commission would be looking at. We actually went out and had Banning Engineering take a look, given the site constraints, at what kind of industrial development might be able to be placed on the property. And he came up with about 200,000 square feet. When you look at what's being developed in this area along the Reagan, whether it's here or right at the street in Brownsburg, a couple 100,000-foot buildings aren't going to be conducive to the kind of industrial development that wants to locate on the Reagan. Most of the industrial development is 500,000 feet plus. The other component is that the 200,000 feet of industrial may sound great, just doesn't generate very much tax revenue. We actually did a study that computed industrial versus multifamily taxes and assessed value. You can see that on the next slide. You can see that in the multifamily scenario, and this is without annual adjustments to assessed valuation, the assessed value would be about $44 million and generate annual revenue of just under $1 million a year, $998,000. You can see what would happen in a typical abated industrial development. It would start out at about $60,000 a year in property tax revenue and peak out at about $348,000. So the difference, the delta in the 11 years following build out would be over $8 million difference, $8 million more with our proposal, just on the multifamily alone, not including the commercial, compared to 200,000 feet of industrial. Next slide. Here's the elevations for the property. Want to point out anything on those, or are they self-explanatory?
I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Tuck-under garages, 4 stories, balconies, all the usuals you'd expect in a Class A multifamily.
So these buildings would be at base roof level 1 foot above R5 and a gable peak a little bit more than that above the R5 limitations, and that's set forth in your ordinance. Next slide is just give you a showing of the rendering of the clubhouse. Next slide. We want to give you some reasons to lean on if you are inclined to accept the fact that this is a good project. And we know that as a planning commission, how important your town plans are and your guidance in terms of planning policy. And I think Bill summarized these in his report as well. We differ in our conclusions a little bit, as you might expect. First, just know that you don't have to be in lockstep with every single one of these criteria. They're just guidelines. In fact, the statute goes out of its way to say you just need to pay reasonable regard to the 5 guidelines. First one obviously does deal with the comp plan. We hope that we've shown you that the innovation goal, while laudable, we think we are compatible with that, even though we are not producing goods and services. But we will allow for the talent that you want come to town to have a place to live and grow in the community. With respect to the current conditions and character of structures, we think this is a clean slate. It's hard to compare us to the legacy residential that was largely really developed for the Reagan. We think that we are good transitional use from that. We certainly accept the fact that there's industrial uses, but those are across the street or significantly distant away and do not face the same types of development constraints. So we think between that and what this land can be reasonably adapted to is square with our proposal for the multifamily and the C2 outlet. We know this, that nothing has been proposed. We think that speaks volumes. We've had independent analysis done that shows that desired industrial is just not feasible and certainly doesn't give you the bang for your buck that our proposal does. We do agree with Bill's conclusion that what we are proposing would not do anything to disrupt or devalue property values throughout the jurisdiction. In fact, we will be providing a pretty big bang for the buck. And then finally, responsible development and growth. We're investing a lot. We're creating a lot of assessed value. We are respecting and preserving the environmentally sensitive areas. We are being responsible with respect to the infrastructure. As I mentioned, 1050 is probably not the kind of street that would be conducive to managing semi-traffic. We know this is viable. This is undergoing a lot of third-party studies, a lot of budgeting, and we don't believe we're adversely impacting anybody close by or far away from the property. We want to leave you with this, and I don't want to get too legal with you, but I go to a lot of planning commission and council meetings, and a lot of boards, commissions, councils get hung up on the comprehensive plan. We respect that. But you don't have to follow the comprehensive plan to the strict letter. You have to kind of mix the ingredients, which are these criteria, with the proposal that is presented to you, and make your best informed decision. You can't get in trouble if you deviate from the comprehensive plan. There's a Supreme Court case that speaks to that, that's cited here. So in sum, last slide, we tried to be collaborative. We've been working with staff. We've had conversations with town council members for many months. We've had neighbor meetings. This is a feasible, developable, responsible development. It provides a good transition between industrial and residential. Will not create a traffic pattern that conflicts with the infrastructure. And we will provide you with significant assessed valuation in excess of what industrial and commercial could generate. And we appreciate your time. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to point something out to you. I'm looking at the statute, and you refer to these as guidelines. However, the statute says the Plan Commission and the legislative body shall pay reasonable regard to, and then it lists the 5 criteria. It's not a may, it's a shall. So I would suggest that it's more than a guideline. This is instruction from the legislature that we are to pay very close attention to these guidelines, and it's not just well, they're there for you if you want to look at them, but you don't have to.
Well, I understood, and I'm not going to argue with your analysis of that. Reasonable regard has been challenged for specific criteria where legislative bodies who ultimately make the decision have either not focused on one versus the other 4. And because this is ultimately a legislative act, you've got cover because it's within your strong discretion and your rationale. It's a rationality standard. So it's not that you can get into any legal peril if you consider everything and make your best rational decision. You don't have to check the box on every single one that says, oh, you missed the comp plan, or oh, this criteria in our mind is not met. Consider all of them, pay reasonable regard, make your best informed decision based on that.
Okay. Questions for the petitioner? After we've had public comment.
Good evening. My name is Fred McInich. I live at 1412 South County Road 1050E. As you can see by this picture up here, that little white square is me and my wife. We've been there, I've been there going on 76 years, and we've lived there in that house 50 years or better. That whole area all in there was once our dairy farm. Everything west of the Reagan Parkway was all of our pasture land and all the big buildings. But the reason I'm saying something is at the last town council that I attended, they were wondering why this project was even being considered when everything west of the Reagan Parkway was being done as it is today, and everything east of the Reagan Parkway over to 1050E from 100 South to 200 South was to be strictly individual housing. And they're wondering why it's being changed. So I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but there it is. The other thing that must be considered, this ground in there is swampland. It's very unstable. When they build those buildings in 5 to 10 years, they're going to have a construction nightmare. We learned while we were farming, we had 2 30-foot tall concrete silos. Both of them wound up leaning just a hair, not much, like 4 inches or something like that. They had, due to the earth, the builder put in huge, extra large foundations, and they still didn't totally do it. Our house is a testimonial to the instability of the ground, even though Lazaro Builders, who John Lazaro's dad built our house, built us a wonderful house, but we do have some issues with it. They're small, thanks to his foresight, but they are there. It's due to the instability of the ground. So this is something that, between the two things, why are you even considering it? And then the other thing of it is, in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a construction mess. I know this for living there for all these years. So, but other words than that, that's really about all I got to say. Has anybody got any questions? Okay.
Thank you for your comments.
I sure thank you for letting me speak. Thank you very much. Very kind. And you've actually helped me a lot down through the years. Mr. Ian over there, he's a godsend to me in the business, due to the business that I'm in.
Well, don't try and hire him away because we think he's a godsend to us too.
I don't
so.
want him to go nowhere.
Next. Have anybody else signed up to speak on this matter?
That would be me. Hi, I'm Tarina Widener. I'm actually the broker for the Lazaro family and
What is your
represent
address,
them tonight.
please?
4320 North County Road 325 West, Danville. The Cityscape project, just so you give you a little history about this property so far. DRG, who is currently developing the west side of this land with industrial, this parcel was also originally part of their purchase agreement. And when they got in and realized how many streams and how much water there was to mitigate, they pulled it out. So Rise Commercial also looked at this property to develop. They rejected the property for the same reason. Too much water for them to mitigate. It works for Cityscape because they can build around it and they can work it into their landscape. So, but a couple other notes just for facts and fun. I guess if you're going to consider 1050 a buffer between multifamily and single family, wouldn't this Veterans Drive be considered a buffer between this project and the Rise Commercial project as well? Just to the south. And you keep referencing that, it's currently zoned for office and office. I brought you a study tonight for both this project and the Glen Rock Springs deal. There's no demand for office in any way, and there's not going to be in the future. There's currently a 7% office vacancy in Avon, and that's only expected to decrease by 1.5% in the next 3 years. So you can have this report if you want. The other issue is the UK project that they referenced. I actually used to be a community economic development consultant in Kentucky and worked on that project at Cold Streams. The housing developed within the industrial park was there on purpose. It was to decrease the carbon footprint so employees could walk to work. You currently have 900,000 square foot B&B erected across the street from this project. And the number one reason people can't find employees is the lack of housing. And so if you want to develop 2,000 or 3,000 jobs across the street, where are those people going to live? We already have a housing shortage in Hendricks County. So, and again, I mean, all the reasons for this project to be there are there. I mean, we just got to work around a little PUD improvement. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to step forward to speak on this agenda item? Okay, discussion.
So I have a question then for staff. From what we heard, that the petitioner says they need the PUD to be able to develop this the way they're requesting. And as you laid out in the staff report, seems like there's two different zonings that could go on. There's a 1 acre or just a little over 1 acre potential commercial lot. That'd be commercial zoning. And then the rest would be residential. And so I heard several things here that we don't have a zoning ordinance that would match what they're looking to develop. They need a PUD to be able to develop because of the unique site constraints. Is all that correct, or could we handle this with existing zoning that we have?
Well, from what I gathered in the testimony, there's a height issue. So the buildings of the 4-story, they probably exceed the height requirements of the R5 zoning district. The petitioner did indicate that a development with this number of units does, under the UDO, require 3 access points to the public street system. And we wouldn't want an access point on Ronald Reagan. So, yeah, I mean, normally that's handled through a waiver process. But yeah, they show 2, and we wouldn't really allow them to have a direct access to Ronald Reagan. And then I think the other one, there was one other one that I can't remember off the top of my head. If it comes down to a straight zoning with a number of variances, then I would prefer the plan unit development to that. I mean, I'm not a big fan of going to the Board of Zoning Appeals, getting a bunch of variances of the straight zoning district, and then coming and doing a development plan review petition after you've gotten variances. If you need a number of variances, I almost prefer them going through the plan unit development process. So the plan commission can review it, and the town council can review it as well, rather than just leave it to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then you're basically stuck with what the BZA has given you. you know. But I'm not entirely, the petitioner has indicated that the current proposal is inconsistent with some of the development standards of the R5 zoning district. And I sort of concur based on what I've heard.
So why wouldn't we want a road cut on Ronald Reagan when we've done a road cut on North Ronald Reagan, north of 200 North for a multifamily development?
We're trying to limit the number of, this, of course, this development will access a signal. And so they will have a left turn and right turn lane, but Ronald Reagan is a parkway, which means it's got a center median. So if you allow cut, sometimes you have to cut through that center median and other sorts of things. We did allow a right in, right out cut for Rise, but for something like this, you would almost want a full access cut. And we just don't want to, we want to keep the flow of traffic along Ronald Reagan south of 36 going, because it's the direct access point to the interstate highway. If that makes sense. I know you get through Plainfield and you have a series of stoplights, but
Right.
it's the quickest way to get to an interstate highway. And when you start putting conflict points along that parkway, you decrease the safety and you decrease the time it takes to traverse the parkway.
So I'm still confused
Or increase
or
the
having a
time.
hard time seeing the difference in what we did with 200, with Ronald Reagan North, because we're going to put stoplights there for that new development, I'm assuming. So is it a matter of distance between county roads and the stoplights?
So this
or-
stoplight, I think, is right, splits the difference in the mile. It's like at the half-mile point.
Okay,
But there is, so you'll have the 100 here and then 200, then you're into Plainfield's jurisdiction after that. But those are really the points along here that we would have access points. Then we want to try to funnel traffic to the street system and to those signals. That's what we want to try to do. And we don't want a bunch of cuts into the median of Ronald Reagan.
But that
Full
median
access.
cut will then tie into the CRG development on the west side of Reagan, correct?
Right. That, and the hope is with that Veterans Parkway, that we'll eventually be able to connect up with a street within Plainfield and then create an east-west thoroughfare through here. So that Veterans Parkway that's along the southern boundary, or that cuts this property, the intent is to take that all the way through Plainfield and connect up with some industrial streets in the town of Plainfield.
Well, Veterans Parkway will connect into 1050 as well.
Right.
And that's another route that you can take to go north and south.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm open to potentially rezoning this site. However, I do not feel there's adequate information on the written record that persuades me that a PUD is preferable over an R5 or parcel being commercial. Again, I found the facts lacking, so I'm in favor of not, well, I guess I'm in favor of recommending a not favorable recommendation to the town council. That's where I stand.
I'm interested in finding out more about the commercial development aspect of this. I mean, a lot of the presentation was primarily,
Well, and that's also a concern I have is, based on training, oftentimes with these PUDs, that commercial outlot is the very last thing that's developed, if it is ever developed.
it's what we see at Turner Trace.
Right. And so when we've talked about, if there was ever a case where we were to entertain a PUD, it would need to be done simultaneously. That it would not be developed last. It would need to be developed, potentially phase one. And so, again, if we were to even remotely entertain a PUD, that would have to be a condition for me. But again, I don't think they've introduced enough facts to persuade why a PUD is necessary, why it's necessary. I know why they want one, but I'm not persuaded as to why it has to be a PUD as opposed to a rezoning to something else.
I'm also not persuaded with the idea that because there isn't currently any industrial or commercial development happening, that therefore means there won't be any. We have been developing the Ronald Reagan corridor and all of our other commercial corridors at a breakneck pace. And I fully anticipate that at some point Ronald Reagan we will see commercial development there. But, this stuff doesn't happen. Just, nobody hears has a fairy wand that just immediately puts, this thing has a process, but as to that specific lot, it does have challenges. I'm not persuaded. I like the idea, but based on the criteria, I'm not persuaded that this is exactly right and that a PUD is appropriate for this lot.
Well, I would support, I'd like to do the same thing and ask the petitioner come forward and talk about the commercial lot, because if you take the commercial lot out of this and make this then just one zoning, do we address this as a rezone and look at that as opposed to maybe you need a PUD to do the multifamily housing to accommodate the building plans that they have here, but I think we ought to ask the petitioner to come forward and talk about the commercial lot, because why not incorporate that into the overall design for multifamily?
Sure, these are definitely good questions. Initially, we actually did, our first site plan was all multi. We asked around, we had a few conversations. We were told that this would be a good retail lot with Veterans Drive being built in there. There's a nice corner right on Ronald Reagan. So we played around with it. Initially we thought we could tuck it back on 1050, but we think it's really good real estate. We think that we could put something there. We would not develop it ourselves. We strictly do multi. But we would probably work with some other developer to have to put retail. We would like to see a really good retail user there. I think it'd be a nice amenity to our residents. Beyond that, we would restrict what would go there because we are long-term holders. We want it to be an asset and an amenity to our residents. So we would be pretty careful. We wouldn't probably sell it at the first offer. But beyond that, yeah, I think it's just a great location for retail, and we could use it as an amenity.
Just to follow up too, then, the one thing is that I'm not sure if we would forward a favorable recommendation to town council, what we're recommending, because I don't have those details and I don't have the packet from June or August, July or August that we had this. So what is different about the PUD that wouldn't be handled in our normal zoning? Is it the height of the buildings? I mean, can you go through the details of that so we know if we would approve this recommendation, what we're approving?
I honestly don't have that information on me. Sorry.
Would you like us to summarize that for you?
I think that'd be good.
So I handed each of you a copy of the actual ordinance that we've drafted to send on to council. And if you turn to Exhibit C, it talks about the standards side by side in kind of table format. What we're proposing on the left side being Cityscape Avon, and then the R5 standards. So while there are many standards that we meet or exceed, there are a couple of challenges. And if you look at maximum building height, we're proposing 46 feet to the roof line, 54 to gable peak, and the R5 is 45, which would make it very hard to do a 4-story product without any architectural features at the roof line. You'd have very low ceilings, et cetera, to comply with the 45-foot max height. You also have a standard that each building in an R5, which is a large apartment building, has a range of units within the building of 7 to 30. You allow for a density up to over 20 units an acre in R5, and we're under that. But because we are working around the environmental constraints, we have buildings that have more than 30 units within the building. So that's a variance from that standard. I think it's in the use standard section of the UDO. And then finally, the 3 access points are not really feasible with this project, nor should they be, because, you know, the intersection at Veterans and the Reagan will be lighted. So there will be ample access to get to the Reagan. Having another cut on the Reagan is not good policy. We agree with Bill. We don't need it to manage our traffic, and we run into kind of the same issue if you want another cut on 1050. We've got one proposed there, one on Veterans to provide access, which is adequate. It just seems like sometimes a check the box to have 3 cuts is a little much and creates some conflicts on collector or thoroughfare plan streets. So those are the big development standard differences between the PUD proposal and then R5. C2, I think we meet. Yeah, we meet all the standards in our outlaw. We wouldn't be asking for any relief.
So in Exhibit D under permitted uses then, points number 2 and 3, you identify uses but indicate not limited to. So for the record, are you looking for changes in the permitted uses for accessory use and amenity areas different than what we have outlined in our ordinance?
Well, we'll tie into whatever's permitted under the UDO. We know in this accessory use scenario what we would have, but we would not want to limit ourselves to whatever else is permitted. And maybe I just didn't draft that correctly.
So
or
permitted
clearly.
by the UDO.
Yeah,
Those are
we
the
don't
keywords.
want to do an end around on the UDO for accessory uses or amenity areas.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
live with all of that. We don't want any other permitted primary uses other than what we're proposing.
Okay. That's what I was looking for. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
While you're up there, the gentleman that came up was talking about the soil conditions, and you had mentioned in your presentation about you've done your soil testings. Can you kind of just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, I am not a soils expert. I will clearly state that. But yeah, I think it has to do with the creeks and the streams. It's very soft soil. It's very cost prohibitive. Our site plan takes into effect, we have to kind of move north, which works out fine with our parking and honestly works with the flow. But yeah, we'll have to spend a lot of money on either zero piers or over excavation to make this site work. It's not cheap. These are soft soils, but we're very confident, and our engineers are confident that we can make it work. It's just expensive to do so.
So you're not going into this blind?
No.
Any further questions for the petitioner? Any further discussion?
So I was just going to say, I think the town needs projects like this. We had a demographic study done, it's been a few years back, but talked about looking for housing for empty nesters as well as for young professionals that didn't want to own houses or wanted to get away from maintaining the houses that had a lot of work to be done, and I'd say I'm one of them. So it's like, I think we do need that. And we heard too that there is a housing shortage and probably an office abundance right now in Avon. So I like the idea of the development. I wondered about the PUD. Now, Bill, based off what we heard and a comment that you made, is this something that, listening to the presentation here, that this might be a better approach for the development of this area to do a PUD as opposed to straight zoning?
It's always better, in my opinion, to do a plan unit development if you cannot design to a straight zoning classification. But if you can design to a straight zoning classification, then you should rezone to a straight zoning classification. I think I danced around that question, but there are some issues that with a development proposal that would require either a trip to the Board of Zoning Appeals or a redesign of the structures or their location. And then, of course, the waiver for the third access point to a street would be something that would be reviewed by Public Works.
And that's
And
what I
commission.
am, sorry, I'll go ahead and finish.
Oh, no, I'm done.
And that's what I would be supportive of, because at least through those boards, they will look at what's being proposed through the lens of, do they meet these variance standards or waiver standards, as opposed to, we want these, codified, and they don't have to present information to explain, yes, we meet the variance standards. This is, in a way, PUDs are a way to get around the variance standards. And so, again, I'm open to rezoning, but not for PUD. I think it should go through the rezoning for R5, and if it's commercial, and then if there's a desire for variances because if they're needed, then let the petitioner make the case. Unfortunately, right, there's nothing in here as to, why these standards are innovative or enhance, the development. Those are the lenses we typically have to look through, I believe, when we grant variances, and that's not addressed in the petition.
I just make one comment, Paul. You kind of started to hint at it, and I wanted to put my own words to it. I know I've in fact said this to Cityscape. The product that they're presenting is something that I agree I think we need in this community. My concern is the location. That is, our comp plan does not call for high-density residential on top of our main north-south thoroughfare in this community. And if we build this today, then we're leaving out any possible growth in that area in the future. That's the end of mine. That's all I got. Thank you.
I think what I'm hearing is we all like the project. Within the write-up, it states it's transitional land use there. There's going to be issues, and like I said at the very beginning, no matter who builds there with the wetlands. So maybe the question comes down to the petitioner is the R5 zoning versus the PUD and the C3, or do you consolidate the commercial piece into the R5 piece? And as Bill said, you come back because you're going to need waivers. And I don't know what they provided us here, how many the waivers are going to be. I'm not a big fan of 6 or 7 or whatever number of waivers. So hopefully there's not a lot there that, I would want you to enhance the product. I would want you to make the roof line, if it exceeds 45 feet, be attractive, be something that we're proud of, not just cut it off at the top and there's nothing to go with it. So,
So are we ready to put forward a motion?
I have a question. So what are when you compare the R5 versus the PUD, what are you getting as far as what we're wanting in the comprehensive plan? What are you getting doing that versus this PUD that's being proposed? When you look at their comparison table of the variations they're asking for as far as like building height and stuff like that.
What was the question again?
What are you gaining from doing an R5 versus this PUD proposal?
Well, at this point, probably you're probably designing the buildings a little shorter.
Right. So,
And you're asking for a waiver of the access point
So you're gonna-
requirements of the UDO. That's probably what you're doing. You're probably rezoning it to R5 and then either going to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a waiver of the height restrictions. Because it looks like they're pretty close to meeting the standards and everything else.
it just seems to me like it's not that far off.
Right.
And are we just getting in the way of a development that if you did an R5, you're going to end up with something very similar? where
Right.
You've just filed some waivers or variances. So if the R5 is okay, and this is very close to the R5, then what's the problem?
Well, for me, it goes, so there's two parts. There's that aspect of it, like, why not go through the R5 and the C2, rezone to that. But there's just the threshold question is, did they make their case that they meet the criteria for the PUD? For me, it's no. You know, if they had, okay, then there's still that other question of, you know, is there a big difference? But do they meet it? For me, again, it's no. So whether it's close or not to the R5, C3, you know, it's informative, but they still have to meet the threshold for a PUD. And I don't think they do.
Okay. And for me, I guess from the public comment, some of the statistics that were provided as far as needs and demographics and things to me, that's persuasive to me. So I'm kind of on the other side. I kind of don't have a problem with it.
Could you repeat that? I couldn't hear what you said.
One of the public commenters gave a lot of statistics and demographics, and then hearing also that it's not really that far different. I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, I mean, I find presuming that the facts that were shared are accurate, I find that persuasive. But again, for me, I have to look through the lens of, do they check the boxes of PUDs? But that's just my thought.
Okay, so then what are the boxes for PUDs that need to be checked?
So it goes back through the staff report, and an aspect of it is a comprehensive plan. Again, it's not consistent with that. And again, I know that might sound, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth right now, saying I'm interested. I find it appealing, but I feel I need to follow the guidelines. And again, the burden's on the petitioner to make the case. And it's not up to us to make the case for them. It's their responsibility to make the case. And for me, they fell short there.
I was going to say, could we ask Dan maybe to jump in here and help explain why a PUD versus one of our zoning areas?
Well, as we talked about in training, PUD is a type of rezone. And again, I think the key issue in this case is that the proposed PUD, which is what's before you, is apparently inconsistent with the innovation sector. And I know the petitioner makes an argument that it's not contrary, but at least the staff believes it is, and it's not exactly what we have in mind there for this particular site. So I think that and although I do think that comparing the proposed development to the current R5 standards is informative, again, I think you have to look at this planned unit development proposal, which is, mixed use. And again, and I think Mr. Calderon talked about this, it's the totality of the five factors, not any one, and just look at the five factors taken together and decide whether you think that this is what would be good for Avon. And it is you're going to make a recommendation to the town council, who will make a legislative decision. And so, those statutory criteria are the factors you consider, and then you try to make the best decision you can.
I think it might be helpful just to go over the 5 criteria. The first one is a comprehensive plan. As Robert has pointed out, this does not meet, at least at first blush, the goals of the comprehensive plan. Number 2, the current structures and uses within each zoning district. Well, on one side, we have legacy residential. On the other side, we have commercial and industrial. Most desirable use for which land in each zoning district is adapted. Conservation of property values throughout the jurisdiction, and responsible growth and development. Those are the 5 criteria that we need to consider. And I think sounds like we've got a lot of questions about at least a few of those criteria, if not all. As it's been stated, I certainly like the idea, and I think this is the kind of housing that we desperately need in Avon. Not sure that's the right place, and I am not necessarily looking at PUDs for the way to develop that if we do go forward.
So,
Public hearing is closed on
So-
this.
I appreciate you going through the criterion, Catherine, because I think that puts it in perspective here. You know, whether this is the right place for multifamily or not, you know, it's developers are welcome forward and propose developments. But this would be, when you point that out, Robert, just like when we approved the multifamily development up by, can't recall the name of the development, but what's going on up north of 200 North?
Avon Landing.
Yes, we've got multifamily on the east side, industrial on the west side. And if you look at the comp plan, it's basically industrial areas. So there we mix that. And do we want to have this again? And I think it's good that we're talking about that because is it appropriate? But if we're really looking at, we're really talking about should this be a PUD or not? I agree. It's like if we can do this through our regular zoning, we shouldn't need to do a PUD. And they're proposing mixed use. They're proposing standards that exceed our R5, but yet there are ways to address that as opposed to, I like the way you put it, Mason, is like anything new or innovative. Don't really see that. It's multifamily development that needs maybe a few variances or waivers to get that development. Not sure PUD is appropriate.
What if we asked the petitioner, would they consider an R5 zoning?
If we don't give them grant them a PUD, then they'd have to come back and do R5 or get variances.
Could you not approve it with the R5 zoning and not the PUD zoning?
I don't think that's what's in front of us.
Yeah, that's not what's in front of you.
I'm ready for a motion.
I'm curious as to, following up on Mr. Zuzin's comment, are you asking us
Did we ask
to,
excuse me,
to amend?
excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Is it appropriate that we already said no to someone in the audience and we didn't ask the petitioner to come forward?
I'm just asking whether, the question is whether we should poll and amend our proposal and come back with something.
Is anybody on the board wanting to ask the petitioner that question?
If they're willing to withdraw their petition, because it would have to be a withdrawal, I would suspect, because I don't know how you'd amend it to be a PUD and an R5 or a C2. But if they want to withdraw it, so we don't submit a, negative or unfavorable recommendation, then
So are you suggesting that the petition be withdrawn as opposed to moving forward with a motion?
that's up to the petitioner. I'm not going to make that recommendation.
Well, we're at a point where it's our decision whether to move forward with a vote. If we make a motion, we'd have to entertain the motion. And that's one where we've had the discussion. Would it change if they came forward with an amended PUD recommendation? I mean, it's really are we looking at a PUD or come forward and work within the zoning and seek the variances or waivers?
Well, we've been on this agenda item for almost an hour, and we do have other items to get to, so I think we should go ahead and move forward with a motion.
I move that the Avon Plan Commission forward an unfavorable recommendation for PUD P22-02 Cityscape Avon, a request for approval of a planned unit development for a residential development featuring approximately 300 attached multifamily units and a commercial outlet subject to strike that last, there are no conditions. So.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Take a call. 4.
4.
4.
Against.
4.
4.
4.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next item of old business, which is Glen Rock Springs. Mr. Peoples?
ZA 2209 Glen Rock Springs. This is a request for approval of zone map amendment, rezoning 10.06 acres from C3 to R3 for a single-family residential development. It's a 10.06 acre property located at approximately 7650 Beechwood Center Road. There's no history on this property. It's zone C3, and this is the general location of it right here, north of the Rural King Shopping Center. There is commercial here along these sides and here, and then there's single-family residential along the north and west sides of the property. And there is a fairly large pond separating this developable area of this property from the single-family residential to the west. We're back to the innovation recommendation of the comprehensive plan, and then and because the innovation, this property also has a recommendation of innovation, and as you're well aware, that recommendation is designated for supporting programming for entrepreneurs, startup businesses, other sorts of incubators that encourages a future potential for high investment. The underlying zoning it is zone C3. This is the transitional office district, and this district permits several low-intensity commercial land uses that could meet the intent of the comprehensive plan's recommendation. The conceptual plan associated with the request does show 32 single-family residential units. This would result in a density of about 3.1 units an acre. This is the conceptual plan for the development associated with this rezoning request, showing the units, the open space, the expanded pond to the west, and a small pond along Avon Avenue. Areas of the north and west are developed single-family residential development. The Groves at Beechwood is about 1.79, 1.82 units an acre. The Park Place is developed at a density of 1.1, 1.2 units an acre. And the proposed density of this development at 33 units is about 43% higher than the Groves of Beechwood and 33% higher than Park Place. Now, having said that, this area is sandwiched in between a fairly high-intensity retail area and single-family residential development. So this is a good place for transitional land use, such as office, multifamily, church, schools, those sorts of things that we talked about at the previous petition. But detached single-family residential units are typically not considered a transitional use. They're considered a low-intensity use that needs to be buffered from higher-intensity uses by a transitional use. This shows the comprehensive plan's recommendation for the area. This is the big innovation area here that encompasses the shopping center to the south and to this unimproved area north of the shopping center. We do recommend that the Plan Commission forward an unfavorable recommendation on this petition, and we do make that recommendation because of the plan, the comprehensive plan's recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions for staff? No questions for staff? Bill, can you talk a little bit more about innovation, about the innovation areas? I know you mentioned areas that are conducive to new small businesses and that kind of thing.
So it's the innovation area is sort of a mix. And I guess the rise development that you've seen several times in the past most closely approximates from an industrial perspective what an innovative use is. And it is an area with, these small lots, small places where someone can come in and take their business from a home business up into this transitional space until they grow it to the point where they can have their own standalone business. Now, this comes in, and not only from an industrial standpoint, so the RISE development is a lot of industrial contractor types uses, start small, move into this space, then find their own space in an industrial area. But there's also an element of this that's known as office suites or retail suites. And it's a 2 or 3 story building that's filled with spaces that could be used for retail or for a service use, such as a beauty salon or these sorts of things, or a small real estate office or a small attorney's office. And I've had some experience with those in Avon. They're very similar, or I'm sorry, in Greenwood, and they're very similar to the RISE development, only they're for office and commercial uses, where you're starting some sort of business from your house, but you've grown to the point where you are no longer, you're too big for permitted home occupation, but not big enough to go into, say, an office environment or a retail space in a shopping center. And you just need a small space to transition while you build that business to move into your own other place.
Is it ever appropriate, or would any kind of residential development ever fall within that innovative criteria?
I think you could make the case it's sort of like a live-work area type of thing. You see that. You don't see that much here, at least I haven't seen it much here. You know, a co-op type of arrangement where you have living spaces, but you also have studios. And I guess closest that I know of in the Indianapolis area is the old Studebaker building, where they've converted that to from, you know, obviously the Studebaker plant to a series of studio apartment type of situations where artists work, but they also live, you know. So yeah, there are ways of doing that along different ways. I'm not sure if you could make something like that work in a suburban setting. It's that Studebaker use is sort of unique, say, to an urban environment rather than a suburban.
It's a unique building.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions for staff?
It's a difficult land use category in our comprehensive plan to really nail down. But the plan does specify what it is. It's just that I think it's an emerging land use, you know, basically because of the way things are in the world now, that people just can't afford to go from a home-based business to a shopping center straight off. They need that transitional use where they can grow their business and cut their costs.
Okay, if there's no further questions for staff, we'll have the petitioner come forward.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam President, members of the commission. My name is Matt Price. I'm an attorney at Denton's here tonight on behalf of AMH Development. I have our project lead for land acquisition and development, Mark Connor, in the audience, who will be available to answer any questions that you may have. We are also going to try a PowerPoint presentation, see if we can get that to run. With your permission, I'd like to hand out a hard copy, though, as well, in case I run into any difficulties. Thank you.
So Catherine, while he's doing that, the one thing I'd ask is that per our, the commission guidelines or requirements here, we have a time limit on presentations, and seeing how we probably exceeded that in the first presentation, could I ask that we try to maintain that this time? And maybe Bill could remind us what that.
We would also ask the petitioner to not destroy city property or town property, please.
Because I'd ask Bill or Ian to help us with what is the time limit on presentations?
If you could limit your presentation to 10 minutes, that'd be great.
10 minutes.
I can certainly do that.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Yeah, we're trying to tighten things up here, and you're right, I should have said something on the first one.
No, that's fine. I can be very brief. Our proposal is very straightforward. We call this development Glen Rock Springs. And as I mentioned, Mark Connor's here with me this evening as well. Okay. Oop, skipped ahead. Let me just tell you a little bit about the petitioner, AMH Development. We were formed in 2017 to develop and build single-family detached for rent neighborhoods. Started from a strategic vision just that few years ago to the 41st largest nationally ranked home builder in less than 5 years. Recipient of numerous national awards, including one of America's most trusted companies, most reliable companies in America, and best places to work. We have a local office in Indianapolis, Indiana. Nationwide, own 55,000 single-family homes in 22 markets. I'm going to talk a little bit about the makeup of our communities and who would rent from for a single-family use. And I think this is consistent with the demographic analysis that was mentioned during the last petition. It's also just a real-world situation on the ground, which is that American Homes caters to those relocating for a job opportunity, empty nesters who are seeking to divest of their traditional single-family owner-occupied home, take some equity out perhaps, and have an option where maintenance is conducted by the owner of the home. So they have the benefits of a single-family home without necessarily the burdens of it. And then there's also a group of individuals who are simply not in the market to purchase. Their preference is simply to be a renter. The proposal itself is a modest one. It's 32 single-family residential homes. All the homes will have fully sodded lawns and be irrigated. That's one of the ways we provide attractive homesteads that are a nice amenity to the area. It's located just west of Beechwood Center Road in what is a classic infill site, just slightly over 10 acres. The property is well screened from the high-intensity commercial uses to the south. So this property is immediately north of the Rural King, and there's a baseball academy towards the east end of that shopping center. We'll be compliant with all requirements of the Avon UDO, and in particular, we're seeking to avail ourselves of the architectural enhancements that are found in your subdivision control ordinance. And so that is the reason why it is an R3 zoning classification that we're seeking, and it would have higher density than those adjoining properties to the north and west, but that is because we're seeking to avail ourselves of the architectural enhancements. This gives you a depiction of where the property is located. It's right in the center there in an area labeled C3. You'll see to the immediate east is an area zone C2. That's a childhood early learning development center. We feel as though the land use for the innovation type use is already present. If you'll see in the southeast corner of the property, there is a commercial office building. That property, if you go online and search for it, offers co-working space today. There are also available outlots for sale on both the east end and the west end of the property that are also zoned today for commercial office space. And so we think, much like the last petition, that this land use that we're seeking offers a detached single-family home rental option that is really not available today in an integrated development maintained by a single owner that will help feed the innovation district. But the way you feed that innovation district is by having housing varieties that welcome a diverse community to your city or your town. Not meaning to jump ahead. That's also a depiction of the parcel outlined in yellow there. You can see the residential development both to our north and west, the commercial to the south, and the office use that I was speaking of directly to the southeast. This is our land plan. Again, 32 individual home sites. If approved, we would plat each one of those individual lots. A resident then would lease the individual single-family home. Give you a little bit of a backstory on who makes up our tenant base. We have a median household income of $122,000, a nationwide occupancy rate at just under 99%. We require a minimum of 1-year leases. Most stay for longer. We have high-quality architectural features. Give you an idea of the finishes. We have stainless steel appliances, Corian countertops. As I mentioned, yards are both irrigated and sodded. We require uniform fencing and have a uniform set of HOA restrictions. We just have a single owner that enforces those restrictions, but keeps the development looking sharp over time. And American Homes is a long-term investor, meaning that they buy the property, build the homes, and hold those homes for the duration. We also pay property taxes at the 2% rate rather than a 1% single-family home. And homes are maintained 100% of the time. We have an on-call staff of individuals that maintain our property, again, locally based in Indianapolis, and again, pay the 2% tax revenue on time and in full. So just briefly show you some of the home elevations themselves. Again, we incorporate the building materials, the plane shifts, the roof pitches, the window treatments, the garage doors, et cetera, that all meet Avon's enhanced architectural requirements, leading to the density that we're seeking for this property and the R3 zoning classification. A few other examples. The homes range in size from just over 1,800 square feet into the mid 2000s, so 3, 4, and we even have a 5-bedroom model. We think this adds housing variety to Avon, which drives the local economy and serves those that are relocating for job opportunities, individuals who want to age in place in Avon, and those individuals who choose to rent and who are simply not in the market to purchase. Again, we have the property tax contribution. The company pays corporate income tax in Indiana, and the company offers high quality, consistently maintained homes that maintain their value over time and are indistinguishable from owner-occupied houses. I'd like to just briefly close with part of the discussion that was done in detail during the last petition, which is the 5 criteria. And again, I would certainly echo Mr. Calderon's and Mr. Taylor's characterization of the 5 criteria being a totality of ingredients for evaluating a rezoning request, meaning that it is not meant to be, in my experience, seeking rezonings for clients around the state and including here in Avon, to be a check the box. There is a requirement to give due regard. It's not a may, you're correct, it's a shall. However, it isn't so rigid that it's like an accounting. It is meant to permit you all to exercise your informed judgment in evaluating whether a proposal makes sense. And so with regard to the comprehensive plan and showing it as innovation, and in particular, perhaps an office suite type use, our research indicates that the market is oversupplied with office and undersupplied with homes. We did some of our own research, which I'd like to hand out to support what the witness said during the last case as well.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, the office buildings that are kitty corner to this property are advertising on Property Shark today, over 5,100 square feet of space. And they identify it as being for co-working space. If you go between County Road 500 East and County Road 900 East along US 36, there's over 31,000 square feet of available office space. And that does not include the additional outlots that immediately adjoin this property to the southeast and to the southwest, which are currently zoned for office uses themselves. You'll see at the bottom half of the sheet, we also did an analysis to show that if you did replicate the property that is kitty corner and built up to 60,000 square feet of office suites, we calculated what the AV would be for that property and what the annual tax revenue would be at the prevailing 2.9126% local tax rate, which yielded $164,000 in annual property taxes. When you compare that to our 32 single-family homes at the projected assessed value for those homes, it demonstrates that our project yields more in annual property taxes to the tune of nearly $60,000. And so we think both on an economic comparison and on a demand comparison, the demand is for more homes in Avon and not more office space. And so while we have respect for the comprehensive plan, we think the goals of it are achieved by the properties that immediately adjoin this property. With regard to current conditions, the staff report notes that the commercial uses to the south and east would support a higher density at this location, and we agree with that. With regard to the most desirable land use, we believe that it is very unlikely that this property would ever be developed for an office use, particularly given that it's in the rear of a commercial center and there are other more attractive lots available for that exact use. We also believe that with regard to the conservation of property values, that the staff report really nails that there's no rational reason to conclude that additional homes would adversely impact the value of homes next door. And then lastly, we believe responsible growth in the community weighs in favor of building what is needed and not what is oversupplied at this time. And so for those reasons, we believe that the overwhelming weight of evidence supports a rezoning for this modest proposal to build 32 single-family residential homes that would add a housing variety to Avon that is not present today. And just to emphasize a little bit about what's going on in Avon's local housing market, a lot of times you'll hear the statistics stated in terms of a national statistic, that the nation itself is short some 6 million housing units, that we have 18% more individuals in the age group between 25 and 34 than there were 16 years ago, and that these factors are increasing demand for places to live, particularly single-family homes where individuals want to live. I noticed today on Zillow that in Avon, there were 7 homes for sale at or below $300,000 and above 1,500 square feet, a total of 7. According to the 2020 census in Avon, the median home price just 2 years ago was $212,000. This means that there were only 7 total homes available with at least 1,500 square feet at 140% of the median home price 2 years ago. And that's exactly why we're seeing a demand for housing, both in Avon and in other communities around central Indiana. It's a place where people want to live for understandable reasons. It's a great place. Wonderful schools, great amenities, a growing industrial tax base. There's reasons why people want to live here, and that's why the demand is present, and it's why AMH would like to be here. We think that adding a single-family rental component will help meet the diverse needs and circumstances of individuals who want to call Avon home. And for that reason, AMH Development is present, proposing a high-quality new rental home project in a suburban environment that's within walking distance of childcare, dining, and shopping. For all those reasons, we would respectfully request a favorable recommendation and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you tonight. Thank you.
Questions for the petitioner?
This might be for both you and Bill. I'll start off with you, Bill. The current zoning is C3.
Yep.
Calls for transitional use. Single-family residential, is that a good transitional use?
Not generally, no. I mean, generally speaking, you're trying to transition from a higher intensity use through a site to single family. You're not necessarily using single family to transition.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the petitioner made it pretty clear that he doesn't believe office is going to be a good sell. Is office the only transition use that might fit in here?
Oh, no, I mean,
Be a better use.
there
for
could
this
be
area.
any number of low, and the C3 zoning district has a whole number of uses. The four that I usually would say as transitional uses, historically, they're multifamily, residential, office, school, and church. Those are the four that I've seen most often used as transitional uses between high intensity uses and low intensity uses. But yeah, there are a number of different uses that you can put in on the site.
My question, would multifamily be an appropriate transitional use in this case?
Yeah, yeah. Now, whether it meets the innovation recommendation of the
Sure.
plan is another thing. But yeah, multifamily would be an appropriate transitional use.
Thank you.
Of the categories you mentioned, it would office be the only one that could be considered innovation, really?
No, I mean, it's one of those land use classifications that are really hard to nail down. So I'm sure that there are other land uses. We've talked about a few of them here that would work. But
Thanks.
no, office is not the only one.
Well, I think if you've been here a long enough time when that development started, that's what it was. It was office, retail, and Beechwood Farms grew up around that. Park Place was probably one of the first residential subdivisions we had. So my question here is the R3, and again, I guess we have to address it based on what they're asking for, the zoning, is the density. You showed the density of R2 in Beechwood Farms. Why didn't you ask for that density? Because they're at 1.79, I think it was in your write-up, homes per acre. And with that, I'll just kind of lump them all together. If you look at our engineer's report, we didn't address the drainage easements. We didn't address the existing ponds. There's letters from the neighbors about the woods and the property lines, the tree lines, that's going to go away. So those are a bunch of questions that I have. So
Yeah, I could answer that about the density, and we can talk about some of the development-oriented comments that were made. And I think that the staff report captured this really well in that it says when it talks about the most desirable land use, it talks about how a higher density would likely be supported here because of its proximity to the commercial use. So you have two commercial uses on the east and south, residential uses further east and to the west directly that are both R3. So what we did was match up that R3. It makes a nice transition with the commercial to the south, and we enhanced the architectural features so that we could improve the aesthetic appearance of those homes in a way that follows the incentive that's created under the subdivision control ordinance. And you're right that we did hit that the office use we think is unlikely. Probably do a similar thing with regard to multifamily and whether a 10-acre multifamily site is a viable use. I think absent a residential use, which seems like a nice buffer and transition with properties to the north and west, it may just be that it is either undeveloped, like it has been for very many years, or it develops for something that is permitted under the C3, which includes animal husbandry, outdoor storage, restaurant use, self-storage, something like that, that's not come to pass up to this point, but certainly not reflective of either the needs of the adjoining residential users or the comprehensive plan at all. And so that's why we think our proposal makes more sense than simply leaving it the way it is. And with regard to the development issues, those are issues that we can address during the development plan phase. I think it's very well understood that our proposal will help the drainage conditions that, for example, the neighborhood to the west has. They have inadequate drainage. Our proposal improves that drainage situation for the neighbors to the west.
Any further questions for the petitioner? Okay, if not, we'll open it up to public hearing. And who we have signed up? Mike Eaton.
Hello, my name's Mike Eaton. I live at 807 North, 200 West in Danville, and I'm the owner of this property. I'll give you a little history about this. When I developed that whole project, where the Cub Foods was, Rural King now, the C3 property, and then I had the woods back there, which I sold off to Beezer Homes. But when we laid this thing out, Bob Jarzen was the planning director for Avon, and Bob said, you know, we need to have this transition area behind the front, and that should be an office. He said that would be a good thing for that. Well, I was a novice developer there, so I listened to him. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was in Mr. Peoples' office, and I asked him for a list of all the zoning that would be allowed into that area. And he stated that the office suites would be a really good use for that. And I said, well, there's not much demand for that. And he told me that it ran in a cycle. Well, this thing's been for sale for 24 years, okay? That's a long time. This is the very first offer I've had on that piece of property. So, you know, the market tells you what the uses are best for a piece of property. You can plan it. You can say this can be this area, this can be this, but then you have rezoning, which you're going through tonight. That's why you always have these rezonings, because someone made a mistake somewhere to plan a piece of property that nobody wants to use it that way. So my thought is you're going to get some houses here that are going to pay a lot of taxes. I don't have to mow this thing 3 times a year, which I have for 24 years. And we move on, we develop this piece. It's an infill piece. It's not attractive for any type of office use. We all know that. I mean, the statistics are you're not going to put that office in there. I don't know. You can use self-storage in there. I think you could put restaurants in there. You could put nightclubs in there. Nobody wants that back there behind that shopping center and on the way to a neighborhood. So I just ask you to consider this. There's real nice houses. They're going to keep them up. There's one owner. He's going to take care of all the maintenance. And it'll be a plus for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else has signed up? Does anybody sitting in the audience like? Okay, go ahead.
Tarina Widener, 4320 North County Road, 325 West. I didn't move in the last hour. But so again, a note about the office demand, 7% now vacancy. That's not going anywhere. The other uses, and I can tell you in this 5 years that I've had this property listed, the minute the sign went up on the property that it was for sale, half the neighborhood called me and said, when was this zoned C3? Well, it's had an overlay zoning for 20 years. Well, we were told it was always going to be ag. Sorry, your realtor didn't tell you the truth. I can't help that. But in spite of all that, the neighborhood made it clear they didn't want business there. They didn't want businesses in their backyard. It makes sense for houses to be behind houses. As for other uses there besides office, Rise looked at this property first, turned it down in Avon because it was too far off the main thoroughfare. Every business that's looked at it has said the same thing. It's too far off of 36. And, you know, there have been multiple inquiries that have called the planning and zoning office and asked, could they do multifamily there? Would that be favorable? And they were told flat no, straight up. So to say that multifamily would be a good location for there, all of a sudden seems a little odd. As for the comprehensive plan, you've already shifted from the comprehensive plan. The minute you rezoned a cluster of single-family homes to accommodate Rise, you showed that you varied from the comprehensive plan. I mean, that was supposed to be single-family, wasn't even on the comprehensive plan. So you made it innovation. You can move things around. But we would really like to see this project here. They have a great track record in wherever they've done other projects. They would be an asset to the community.
Is there anybody else present who would like to speak on this agenda item? That said, public hearing on this agenda item is closed. Discussion.
One of the points here, when we talk about transitional, and I think staff calls it out in the report that, some of the single-family residential homes are typically considered transitional. Office, commercial, or multifamily residential might be considered better transitional. Well, this is a product that, think about multifamily homes, apartments, those are rental products. This is a rental product, but it's a single-family home. So if it was single-family homes, would we be looking at that as, we don't want single-family homes there, we want offices, be it there's been no demand, and I think we need to take that into consideration, because 24 years being on the market to get no offers is a telling point, and there's no demand for office space, and it is kind of located in a hidden spot, so you'd have to have something that is bringing that business in. Seems like a good transitional use of this, where you have rental units, because if we're going to say multifamily homes or apartments, and we're talking rental units, and if we thought rental units were good for multifamily homes, then why not rental units for single-family homes that emulate single-family homes? As far as the development goes, and I understand the concerns that are raised in the letter, but those are concerns that we will see all the time in development when it butts a existing development. So it's something that, yes, that as part of the development plan that the developer would need to address. It seems like this is a good transitional development for that lot that might be considered innovative because of trying to bring a product for people that don't want to own homes but want to live in a home.
If we're looking at the criteria, comprehensive plan, obviously there's conflict there, which is why they're asking for the rezoning. Current structures and uses within each zoning district, I think it's a lot of the same things that we had on last agenda item. This is a transitional piece of property, and the question is, what is the best way to transition from the residential to the commercial with this infill lot? Is it the most desirable use for the land? I don't know. Is it? I mean, I could see some doctor's offices there or something. I don't know. Conservation of property values. I think I agree with staff report in responsible growth and development. Those are the things we need to consider. And it seems like the first three are the ones we need to discuss.
I had another comment too, because I guess I'm looking at, does it meet the comprehensive plan, and maybe it's a bit of rationalization, but it is innovative. It's a different product that is being introduced for that lot. So what we'd like to see is, if we said see something in C3, that's great, but there is no demand for that. And that's kind of what I'm taking into consideration, because it'd be nice to see that. And I'm not sure everything that's in C3, if we went through the entire list of acceptable uses, it might be interesting, because there are probably some in C3 that the adjoining neighborhoods might say wouldn't want to see that type of business in there.
That's probably accurate.
Yeah. Because it covers quite a bit of varied uses.
A lot of the more intense uses are uses that are permitted by special exception. They would have an extra step in their approval process, sort of like self-storage was one of the land uses that was said. And it is true, it's permitted use, but it's permitted use by special exception. So the Board of Zoning Appeals would have to approve a special exception on it. Nursing home, childcare, petitioner did indicate restaurants or another one, Class A and Class B restaurants. And indoor and outdoor recreation areas are permitted by special exception, not by right, but by special exception. So there are some fairly intense land uses in the C3 zoning district that would be permitted either by right or by special exception that may be objectionable to the neighbors.
So again, it's one of those having all the information available and understanding and making that decision that even with traffic, single-family homes, even though they're rentals, would more likely produce less traffic than apartment buildings. So I guess I look at this, it is innovative use of that land and would meet that innovation. Again, you could say I'm rationalizing.
Bill, if we were to put forward a favorable recommendation under criterion 2, it talks about the proposed density. Moving forward with a favorable recommendation doesn't lock in that density, right? That could be discussed at a plat.
Right. This is it's a conceptual plan that you're seeing here. So this is the petitioner's done some initial work using the enhanced architectural standards and developed a subdivision consistent with the plan. Obviously, they'll have to go through primary platting and secondary platting, where they'll do the detailed engineering analysis. My experience has been that the engineering firms that we typically work with, they usually get pretty close. I mean, they may lose 1 or 2 lots, but it's you usually don't have a professional engineer be way, way off. So, I would anticipate that you're going to see something very similar to what you see on the conceptual plan if they get through the rezoning process.
Thanks.
With all we've heard this evening, I think that this would be a good use of this particular property.
Any other discussion? Comments? Are we ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion unless somebody wants to make a comment.
Bueller?
I move that the Avon Plan Commission forward a favorable recommendation for ZA 22-09 Glen Rock Springs, a request to rezone approximately 10 acres from C3 to R3.
I would second that motion.
Take a vote. Four.
Against?
4.
Four.
Against.
Motion carries. I would like to suggest we take a quick 5-minute recess.
Hey, where's my little clicker?
We're going to go ahead and call the meeting back into order. Next item in the agenda is Mr. Peoples.
DPR 2216 Chick-fil-A at Beechwood Center. This is a request for approval of development plan to construct a 4,784, right there, 4,784 square foot restaurant with a waiver of section 2102E to allow for a front facade with 15% glazing, 35% required, waiver of section 2103A to allow for 6-inch building articulation, the minimum of 3 feet required, a waiver of section 611D to provide for parking spaces that are 18 by 9 feet rather than 20 by 10 feet. A waiver of section 611G to provide for landscape islands of 102 square feet and 5.2 feet in width rather than 130 square feet and 8 feet in width. And a waiver of section 611A to allow for light trespass along the eastern western property boundaries of 0.6 of a foot candle when the maximum of encroachment is 0.3 of a foot candle. The site zone C2 located in tier 1 of the US 36 overlay district. This is the general location. It's an old PNC bank on Beechwood Center Drive there, just in front of the Rural King Shopping Center. Right there. So to the north is the shopping center, has Emmys and Rural King in it. 36 to the south, bank, and Dairy Queen, I believe, is there to the west of it. This is a request for development plan approval to construct a 4,784 square foot restaurant with drive-through. The petitioner has requested several waivers of the standards of the ordinance: glazing on the front facade, building articulation, parking space dimensions, a landscape island size, and light trespass. And the Board of Zoning Appeals has approved 2 variances and a special exception for this site. So the variances dealt with deleting the bypass lane and to allow stacking elements in the front yard between the building and US 36. And then the special exception is a requirement for any drive-through located in tier 1 of the US 36 overlay. As a redevelopment project, of course, there are many, many aspects of this petition that are favorable. It's much more preferable to have a thriving land use at the site rather than have a vacant building, as we've had for several months, probably more than a year. But I'm just, I've been a little stringent on this staff report, given the restaurant. And I'm just highlighting one finding of the waiver process is that the proposed alternative represents an improvement, increase, advance, or expansion beyond the terms of the applicable standard. And the way the staff generally interprets that particular, so when we get an alternative that doesn't necessarily meet the letter of the law, we tend to use this standard and look at it and say, okay, it may not meet the letter of the law, but does the waiving this standard allow us to get a better building? One of the things to keep is sort of like the Lot 7 building in Harvest Landing when they were requesting a waiver of some of their building materials. And the thought was, well, yeah, the building materials they were requesting weren't consistent with the strict letter of the law, but I think it would have made it a more attractive building. And now that it's built, it does look like a pretty nice building. And so that's the way we usually look at it when the waivers. In most cases, with the waivers in this particular case, staff doesn't necessarily agree that the proposal generally exceeds the standards of the ordinance, but rather that the petitioner is merely requesting the waiver because they just they don't desire to meet the minimal standard of the ordinance. And that's the reason we're coming across against a lot of the waivers that are being requested. I throw this up here just to give you an idea of some buildings Chick-fil-A has done in other jurisdictions, because you're probably going to hear about how Chick-fil-A, designs these buildings for efficiency and operations, and we can't, deviate from these standards. This is the site plan of the site. It shows the building to the south. with the drive-through elements around it, parking to the rear, and then backloaded off of this road right here. And this is the elevation of the structure. Now, we did negotiate with the petitioner and the glazing requirements. This is the side that fronts on US 36. And these are faux windows. And so that's when we say we recommend approval of the waiver of the glazing requirement, it's because that we've incorporated a lot of faux windows into this side to give it the look of that front-like facade, even though they're not necessarily meet the glazing requirements of the ordinance. But the rest of the building is basically your standard rectangular building. You can see it right here. It's just a rectangle along the southern part of the building. No art, very little character or any sort of innovation or anything else like that. Just basically a standard rectangular box. So the staff's down. The details, of course, are in our staff report. Why we are not supporting most of the waivers being requested. We do recommend approval of the waiver for the glazing because we believe the petitioner has provided an alternative that meets the intent of the ordinance anyway, and that's to provide a front-like facade facing the US 36 frontage. But we don't recommend approval of the waivers of building articulation, parking space dimensions, landscape island size, and light trespass. We just believe that these are elements of the design that can be designed to meet the minimal standard of the ordinance. And if we're going to get a building that meets the minimal standards of the ordinance, then they should meet the minimal standards of the ordinance and not request a series of waivers. Now, if those waivers are not approved, this is a development plan review process. The petitioner has the opportunity to file a petition or file amended plans. So a denial of the waivers and a denial of the site plan doesn't close the door on this petition, just like a plat. On a development plan, the petitioner has the opportunity to file amended plans that comply with those elements of the ordinance that you haven't waived. And then if they comply, then we put it back on the agenda for a rehearing by the commission. But if the plan commission does approve all the waiver requests, then we would recommend that you approve the plan committee or the proposal. And we would subject that proposal to the 3 standard conditions that we put on almost all development plans. And that is the revised plan to comply with all commitments and conditions, the landscape bond required, and the development shall comply with all relevant portions of the town code and comments by our public works department, the fire department, and Crossroad engineers at the pre-construction meeting. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So just to clarify, if we do not approve even one of the waivers, then we can't move forward beyond that, and the petitioner would need to come back?
Yeah, I mean, the plan as proposed wouldn't comply with the ordinance. So if you deny a waiver, then you can't approve the plan. But if you choose to deny the waivers and deny the plan, the petitioner does have the opportunity to file revised plans that comply with the ordinance. So those elements.
So we wouldn't be stopping it dead in its
Right.
tracks?
It's not like, say, when the town council denies a rezoning, it's
Right.
dead. In this particular case, and the same thing with the subdivision plat. If you were to deny a subdivision plat, the petitioner has the opportunity to file amended plans to comply with the ordinance.
I just don't want to upset the Chick-fil-A crowd out there.
Believe me, I don't either.
Help me understand, Bill. They've already been to the Board of Zoning Appeals already and gotten 2 variances and 1 special exception?
Right. So there are certain elements of the UDO that are waiverable by the plan commission through the development plan review process. It's anything in the landscaping, parking, and lighting standards in the ordinance. I forget which chapter. I think that's chapter 6. Let's see. Yeah. So the plan commission has the authority to waive any standard in chapter 6, which is landscaping, lighting, parking and loading, those sorts of things, except for signage. But if it's a regular development standards, in the case of the drive-through, those require action by the Board of Zoning Appeals to the variance process. So it was just a procedural thing. They needed to go to the BZA to get relief from those standards in the ordinance rather than ask for a waiver through you all.
Bill, in your report, you mentioned that you had seen other Chick-fil-A buildings that would be more consistent with our ordinances that you, and so
Well,
do you believe that's to be the case with most of the waivers where you do not recommend?
Well, you got to remember that the only real waiver dealing with the building is the articulation requirements. So most of the waivers that are being requested are site issues. So
Right.
it's parking lot, parking space size and landscape island size and light trespass. So the two waivers that are being requested is glazing on the front facade and our building articulation. They're asking for 6 inches, and the standard in the ordinance is 3. Now, the only time that the Plan Commission has approved something as low as 6 inches was for Swenson's. And that's because Swenson's had that big canopy going over it that added some architectural distinction to their property. Other fast food restaurants such as Zaxby's and Raising Cane's and they've had to incorporate articulation into their building. And now the Planning Commission did approve waivers of a building articulation, but never down to 6 inches. It was always,
3 inches.
2, 3, between 2 and 3 inches in most of those cases.
Well, you're kind of answering a question I was going to ask. We've got a lot of development. First of all, that's 36 is our corridor, and that's where we have the overlay district. So everybody's going to see that. Why wouldn't they want to be at our minimal standards?
Yeah,
Because that's a reflection on our community and on our town. So I guess that's my first question. And then what did we do to the Saxby's, the
Raising Cane.
O'Reilly, well, the ones right next to them, O'Reilly, across the street, Culver's, when they redid all that stuff. I mean, I don't remember, I wasn't a part of this body, but were there waivers asked for those?
So since I've been here, the waivers that I can recall off the top of my Swenson's, I think Zaxby's incorporated articulation into their building. They didn't like it, but they did it. And so did Raising Cane's. Even Costco. Now Costco got a waiver, but they incorporated articulation into their building. But I want to say it was like 18 inches rather than 3 feet. And there was a way they did it to add architectural distinction to the building.
They also put brick on around more of the exterior than
Right.
they normally would have.
Was there one also for Rise? Wasn't it like 11 inches?
Rise didn't have any articulation requirements because they were on the Ronald Reagan corridor. They had masonry requirements.
Okay.
Any further questions for staff?
Across the street, there was a couple. Across the street, there were some industrial buildings that did have some articulation requests, the Ronald Reagan Parkway or the Ronald Reagan one.
There's no further questions for staff. Let's have the petitioner come forward.
Thank you.
And we would ask you to keep your presentation to 10 minutes.
Yes.
I have to,
understand and appreciate that
getting into new habits here.
quite a lot.
Joe Calderon, 11 South Meridian, Indianapolis, representing the developer, owner, Allrig, who is proposing to develop Chick-fil-A. We do have Todd Richards from HR Green, the civil engineer, and we have the franchisee here as well. So I think that the best thing to explain is what is driving our additional requests today. And we certainly do respect the 36 overlay. And what makes this unique is the fact that this site's already existing. It's a little smaller than a prototypical Chick-fil-A store, so much so that we have to do parking across the driveway to facilitate employee parking. So the site is tight, and it's unique in that the entrances are obviously not off 36 directly, but they're off Beechwood Center Drive. So what we did and what we sought from the BZA a couple of months ago was a concept that kind of segregates the drive-through from the in-store experience. And that's why we had to seek variances, was to have dedicated drive-through 2 lanes around. You obviously, in this community, we know how popular Chick-fil-A is. And the BCA thought it was kind of novel in that nobody is competing between parking to go inside the store and drive-through. In other words, it's completely segregated. So that means that the back of the restaurant, in essence, in this case, faces 36. So what we did in talking with staff was 2 things. And I think they like the faux windows that we did, and that's obviously a waiver. But remember, that's the back of the store, if you will, that faces 36. So we give you that front look without all of the natural glazing. So we are asking for a waiver of that. The issue with the articulation solely relates to that south facade facing 36. So we meet articulation on the other sides, but remember, that's back of the house type of operation. We have added some architectural treatments, a couple of additional towers to the building. As you can see, sticking up off of the roof, elements to provide some interest. And we'd have articulated with different color brick, and we do meet the material requirements for certain. So that would be the south elevation. The other thing that we've done to mitigate is our landscaping plan. If you know the site today, yes, there are some perimeter trees on 36. And a couple along the side yard facing to the west. This landscaping plan adds 55 trees, 15 deciduous, 40 evergreens, and literally hundreds of supplemental plantings. So you can see that we still are going to have the perimeter trees on 36, additional shrubs and trees, both interior and exterior, to kind of soften any view from 36. And that, we think, mitigates some of the concern about the building articulation and represents our best efforts to improve what's currently existing today and meeting or exceeding the landscaping requirements. So one waiver relates to the fact that our landscape islands, and you can see them inside the parking lot there, are a little smaller, a little narrower than the UDO requires. But the simple fact of the matter is that this is so much more landscaping than anything else in Beechwood that it is going to make a drastic improvement to the existing condition and the shopping center. A lot of this conversation relates to what Bill sees, and I understand it. Well, just design of the ordinance, drop some parking spaces, and you can meet these requirements. Well, we've asked Chick-fil-A to do that. This is already a site that is below the kind of desired threshold for parking, which is over 70 for spaces. Even though we exceed your code, they still have to operate. Keep in mind, the Chick-fil-A model has 20 plus employees at any given time. vastly more than other quick serve restaurants. So it is a different scenario. You have young people that are standing outside under the canopy, taking orders, filling orders, et cetera. And you have a scenario where you have to have a safe place for them to park. And then you have to be able to meet not only the demand for customers that are wanting to dine in, but you have mobile pickup, and you have third-party delivery services. And that's what's really driving kind of the parking demand and a lot of these variances. So we could address the parking stall size in that regard, but we'd lose spaces and we'd probably lose the opportunity to do this franchise opportunity because it's going to be pretty far below threshold. It's going to lead to congestion and other things that would be the unintended consequences of not taking a look at this development plan holistically and understanding that Chick-fil-A does these stores all over the country with a 9x18 type stall and in this fashion. So
3 minutes.
we'd like you to look at the parking waiver a little more holistically. As to the light at 0.3 foot candles, we get it. This is solely from the canopies. Keep in mind, you have real human beings underneath those canopies. You have to have some level of safety. It's kind of a no harm, no foul because we've got businesses on either side. So you're really not going to be adversely affecting anybody that is residing to either side, either the east or the west side. And that is the waiver with respect to the lighting. And then I think let's see if I've covered all the waivers. I think that gets to the essence of the waivers that we're seeking, but keep in mind, just in sum, a lot of what we're asking for, we believe we have mitigated. This building, again, faces to the north, so the back of the store fronts on 36. We've added a lot of landscaping. We have added great materials. It is an attractive building. The images that Bill shared with you are old prototypes, no longer being built. This is a unique concept that we think will bring much needed additional service to the town and was enthusiastically approved by the BZA. So we certainly respect your opinions and are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Is there some reason why you can't, you put the back of the building fronting 36, and thus you're asking for these waivers, can't you flip it and go the other way? Turn it around?
You can't, for the simple reason, if you want to pull that site plan back up. We can't change the entry from Beechwood Center Drive. So to flip the building so that it fronts on 36 would result in a situation where you could not segregate the drive-through from the parking, which was the whole goal of the scenario. Or you would have a drive-through that would not have the amount of stacking that makes it even viable to run the business, because you'd have to shift parking to the front perhaps, which is not a great scenario either. So we actually looked at scenarios like that before we went to BZA, and it was concluded that that was just not practical or viable.
And I appreciate that. So then why would you want to sacrifice your architectural standards, putting it the way that you want to put it? and not meet the minimum standard.
Well, we do meet the standard on 3 sides. It's just that last side. Again, it's,
Fourth side.
it's
why
a
not
back,
make that
it's a
standard?
back of the house kind of issue.
We got the back of the house facing 36.
Right. We're trying to mitigate that. We're nervous about, we've got all of this situated. We were asked to put foundation plantings in and we have to have some patio area around that. We're worried that if we add that additional articulation, that again could cause a redesign of the site. Obviously, we're asking for a waiver from you, and if you say no to that, we'll have to go back to the drawing board.
So when you say you were asked, I would guess I'd look at it a little bit differently, that as you came into the community, there are ordinances. So we didn't ask, it's the ordinances were there that you would meet. And just like with the BZA, considering the innovative design on the drive-through that we approved because it was innovative, that, we're asking for you to meet the ordinances, but not that you didn't know about those ordinances. You're trying to make this area, this land meet a design for you. So to meet the articulation would seem to be a little one, just like when I get in the parking spaces, it's like, one of the things that I get concerned about is with the parking spaces being squeezed on size. Now we're creating a safety issue where we get large vehicles are a matter of course anymore. We're going to have trucks, we're going to have SUVs trying to squeeze into smaller space. So you create an innovative design to have parking space, but now we're trying to squeeze large vehicles into these small parking spaces. And according to the staff report, you've secured parking off-site for the employees. So it's not like these are spaces for the employees, they're for your patrons
Correct.
that are trying to squeeze their big vehicles into a smaller space. And that is what I'm concerned about as far as a waiver to shrink the parking space size.
How many parking spaces would you lose if you met the ordinance?
I'll have to have Todd Richards from HR Green answer that question.
Hi, Todd Richards with HR Green. So I guess.
Could you name your address, please?
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. It's 1391 Corporate Drive, McHenry, Illinois.
Thank you.
Sorry. So your question was number of,
How many parking spaces would you lose if you met the ordinance standard?
I'm not sure that we actually looked fully into that one. I can say that we would lose, at a minimum, we would lose 3, possibly 6 in order to meet that standard. And so the parking stall dimensions, it's kind of we've got 2 scenarios going on. So the width, yes, all the stall widths are 9 feet. The stall depths, some are 20. So at the north, the middle 12, and then the south row of parking up along the building, those are 20 feet deep. It's the ones on the east and west side that are only 18 feet deep. So the overhang is going towards the landscape islands. And then basically you don't have cars pulling in head to head with another stall. You don't have to, you've got 20 feet for where the vehicles then pull into the front of the building itself. The 9 feet though is the critical dimension. And so we utilize that. Well, let me step back. So like Joe had noted, 9x18s, fairly common throughout most of the areas that Chick-fil-A develops. We use 9-foot wide stalls so that we could pull the building further to the north so we could implement foundation plantings along the north and south sides. Also, we did that to basically create additional landscape. So for the east and west, we pulled those stalls to be smaller so that we could get additional landscaping. So the landscaping, interior landscaping, I believe the ordinance says that we have to be at 7%. Currently, the site plan that you see before you is at 8-point-something%. So we actually are over on the required landscaping interior to the parking lot. But to your answer, or the answer to your question, we would lose at least 3 stalls. The optimal number of stalls for Chick-fil-A is 75. Right now we've got 68, and so they're still not overly comfortable with just the 68. If we start losing more stalls, the efficiency and of the operation starts to get diminished because of that. Right now, all we have on site is 43 stalls. Yes, they are able to share the 25 to the north, and those would be mostly for the team members. Chick-fil-A, they don't really want their customers to have to walk across that subdivision road.
What is the occupancy of the building?
I actually do not know that answer off the top of my head. I'll have to look that one up. I can't,
Because I'm just wondering why 70+ parking spaces, especially if this is a smaller building, as you've already stated, than what Chick-fil-A normally builds, correct?
I am not aware of that. So let me
like
just, if you don't mind, let me look at the site plan to see.
It says
You wanna talk
60,
to
this
that,
says
Brett?
62
It's
on
the-
here.
So it's a P14 LRG, so that's the large. So it's not one of their smaller
Okay,
buildings.
I must have misread. I thought I
It-
heard somebody comment that this was already smaller than what
The
Chick-fil-A
land
normally was.
size.
Oh, the land size,
Yeah,
okay.
Land size is,
Okay, thank
is a
you.
little bit smaller than what they would typically would be looking at. And again, that's proven by the shared stalls to the north.
Dave, what were you
This,
saying?
this says indoor seats 62.
62 indoor
Outdoor
seats,
seats is 16,
it's
16,
16 outdoor.
right.
Okay.
So the waiver for the landscape islands, is that in tandem with the parking lot? I'm just trying to understand why you're seeking a reduction in the size of the landscape islands. Is that because of parking as well?
Exactly. It's the majority of these, so the parking stall sizes, the parking lot island sizes, and then the reduction in the parking island area, that all goes back to the need for parking. And again, so the 75 parking stalls, that comes back to Chick-fil-A and basically their years of just analysis of what is the optimal number. So we just went through another one in another community, and again, always aiming for that 75 mark. Now, they can flex that a little bit, but as soon as we start dropping down below that, it just does not work that well for Chick-fil-A. And again, the number of team members on staff at or on shift at any particular time, 15 to 25. So that's far more than a standard quick serve restaurant. Because you've got people outside, inside. I mean, it's significant.
But your team members are parking off-site.
Correct. So that would be those 25 there. Then you have 43 stalls on site. The other consideration is it's the mobile app. So customers are pre-ordering, coming in, using the parking stalls so that the team members can then deliver their meals to the cars. You have third-party deliveries. So those services also utilize parking stalls. And then you have your dine-in customers as well. When Chick-fil-A, they drive more dine-in customers than some of the other quick-serve restaurants.
And I'm still struggling with the articulation as to why you can't meet the minimum standards on the south side. I appreciate the efforts to, fill up and put additional landscaping, but why not meet the minimum standards articulation?
So, I don't want to lean on this, but it is, this is their prototypical building. So they have been analyzing the interior efficiencies of these buildings, and any types of changes to that start to negatively impact the efficiency of the inside of that building. That's really the short story on that. And then also, so if we were to introduce an articulation on the east side where that tower element is at, then they would also want to integrate that on the west side at that tower element. Well, the way it's laid out currently, the southwest corner is just beyond the building setback line. So any type of articulation on that west side is now going to have to push the building further to the north, which will either impact the foundation plantings or would then impact, again, the number of stalls.
Yeah, and that's what I figured.
Just, it's like a domino effect.
And unfortunately, like as Paul was touching on earlier, like these ordinances are in place, and so in order to seek a waiver, it needs to be, other than a business justification of, it'll impact our costs, like how is the request going to enhance or improve, so on and so forth? And not that you can respond to that, but that's just my
Can we talk also about the lighting, which is waiver of section 6.11 to allow, staff has suggested what seems to me some pretty reasonable suggestions for meeting the lighting standards, a warmer color, adequate shielding. Is there a reason why that standard cannot be met?
Well,
Why there's a persistent request for waiving when it appeared, based on what staff's report, this seems to be an easy fix.
it seems that way. So we went back to the lighting consultants. They've already toned down the light levels underneath those canopies. Typically, the light levels underneath the canopies are around 20-foot candles. So significantly brighter than what we showed today. Underneath the canopy, it's about 4 to 5 light candle or foot candles. And, you know, the lights themselves inside of the canopy are basically down facing. They shine straight down, but obviously we are close to the property line, and so we get some light spillage. And again, we're talking, the ordinance says 0.3 foot candles, and the photometric plan shows 0.6 foot candles. But I don't know of any other way to really cut off.
What about shielding?
I would have to actually talk to a lighting consultant on that to see what we could do, because they're basically like can lights already. So I don't know.
Are they
what
already
else.
inside the structure of the canopy?
Correct. They're already like I call it the ceiling of the
So the
canopy.
spillage goes over, you're saying, to the other adjacent property owners.
Correct.
And those adjacent property owners, one's a bank that's not even open at night, and the other one is the Dairy Queen.
Correct.
So it's just our ordinance that you're trying to work around versus the spillage? Because to me, the spillage isn't going to affect anybody.
Well, they have to have a certain, yeah, it doesn't hurt anybody.
Which side of the building is the canopy on?
It's actually both sides.
Yeah.
West and east.
Yeah.
So those would be, I guess the spillage would also be impacting drivers on
No.
36?
No, that would be on the south side. There is no.
Well,
there-
you can see the east and the west side from
Correct.
36.
Right, the photometric plan just has
Do we have the
I think
photometric?
so.
I'm gonna
It's
try-
gonna be hard to see it.
Yeah, the thing with the photometric plan, unless I can zoom in on it, I can't show you the perimeter because, well, I can show you it, but the light levels are so low that they look like little dots. So the concern is basically right at the canopy. So we'll take the west side first, basically right at the north and south limits of the canopy. That's where we start to get to the 0.6 foot candles. As you work your way to the north, it fades out to 0.3. As you work your way to the south, it fades out to 0.3. Same way on the east-hand side, right at the canopy, and then just maybe a few feet north and south of that, you're at, and I believe, if I remember this correctly, it's 0.5 foot candles. But then as you work your way to the north, and not very far, I'm not, it's a matter of maybe 10 feet, you're starting to get back to your 0.3 foot candles, same way as you work your way to the south. So it's very isolated to just the location of the canopies.
Do we have any further questions for the petitioner? Because we need to get this moving. Okay.
So have you worked on other Chick-fil-A projects?
Yes.
What's the lowest number of stalls that you've seen approved by corporate within the last 12 months?
It's a great question. So for a standard store, I don't have, the last one I saw was 75. Actually, I had to get more, but I don't have a huge backlog of number of stores. I don't have them memorized. And we've done other small format stores, but those don't apply here.
So this model, you've seen the lowest is 75?
I can't say for certain what the lowest number is that Chick-fil-A would approve. Like I said, the optimal number is 75 total. This one shows 68. So they've already come down by another 7 stalls.
Okay. Let's open up to public hearing. Nobody? Okay. Discussion?
I believe you still need to open up the public hearing,
There's nobody. I did.
whether it's signed up or not. You still have to open.
Oh, sorry. It's been a long day. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak to this agenda item? Public hearing for this agenda item is closed. Okay. Discussion. I mean, we've got a lot of waivers here that,
Yeah, maybe that's when I should have spoken. I'd like to actually, I appreciate Mason's comments. I agree with Bill and I agree with staff. Usually when we grant a waiver, it's to meet the spirit of the law, if you will, to improve it if we can, or at least meet the intent. The lighting, I can understand. I think they're doing their best to meet that intent. The parking spaces, I think they're intending to meet that intent. They're failing, but they're intending to, and they're working within the design of the building. The architecture standards is the one that I'm having a hard time backing off of. We, the council, put in a lot of work to focus on architectural standards, especially in our corridors. And we pushed really hard. This body pushed very hard on Zaxby's recently, pushed very hard on Culver's to meet the spirit of that law. I think I can lean on, or I could back off on all the other waivers except that one. That's the one that I think there's a way that you can meet those architectural standards, at least the spirit of.
I agree because the architectural standards aren't putting a burden on the business in terms of their ability to function. You know, when you have reduced, Chick-fil-A's been around a very long time. I have no doubt that they know exactly what is best for a particular store to opt to function at its most optimum, including parking spaces and that kind of thing. But building articulation isn't going to impact that. I don't see that. So then it's just a matter of, we just don't want to. And I have a problem with that waiver as well, that waiver request.
Well, I would agree, because we've had companies in here before that have standards, but then when you look at it, like what staff did, the research, they conform to the areas that they want to go into and do business. So I would agree that the articulation is one that I find that they could find a solution for, and that's not a waiver that I believe we ought to grant. On the parking, I guess I'm going to ask staff as far as the size of parking spaces go, because we've had this discussion before over and over again. Is 18 feet deep, 9 feet wide, is that a skinny parking space? Do we have those throughout the town?
I'm sure we have them. So if you were to go to the architectural graphic standards, which is the Bible, for lack of a better term, for most architects, 18 by 9 is the standard. So that's what most architects would design to. I've worked in jurisdictions that had a sort of a strict 10 by 20 like ours. I've had jurisdictions that say, it's got to be a minimum of 9, a maximum of 10, minimum of 18, maximum of 20, as long as this stall size is a certain size. And I've had, like Greenwood was 18 by, or 9 by 18. That was perfectly fine with them. But the architectural standard is 9 by 18.
Yeah, I agree with the comments that have been shared thus far. While articulation does impact, they can adjust to that impact. So, yeah, I'm supportive of the comments that have been made thus far.
Well, and it's interesting too, in a lot of the conversation, landscaping was driving a lot of some of this things that were trying to be waived and adjusted. And so maybe I'm thinking, are we over landscaping to do that? Because I always know when I'm in a 9-foot parking spot, because my car opens against the other car, or they open against me, or the person's parked on the line, which is now smaller than that, but I can live with that. So maybe it's the landscaping and the screening that is creating some of that angst. But I go all the way back, to me, this is negotiation. This is give and take. And we're given a whole lot. And I don't think we've gotten anything back yet. And believe me, Chick-fil-A they're great for this community. They're great ambassadors for this community. And I would bend over backwards to help them. But I think there's got to be a little love for us here from the architectural standards. So I have.
As a person who drives a little tiny car, I am often amused that I'm the only person who can park in some spaces because of the large SUVs that take up that full 9 feet space. So do we want to move forward on these waivers? Is there any more discussion? Do I hear a motion on any of these waivers?
So waiver 1 pertains to the articulation, is that correct?
Waiver 1 is the glazing.
Glazing. Okay. I move that Avon Plan Commission approve waiver 1, DPR 22-16 Chick-fil-A, a waiver of Article 2.102E to allow for a front facade with 15% glazing, maximum 35% required.
Do we hear a
Second.
second? It's a vote.
My only comment is staff recommends approval, so I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Captain Ranger,
4.
Robert Vogt,
4.
Jason Pike,
4.
Dave Copper,
4.
Charles Isaac,
4.
Greg Zuzen,
4.
Paul Gutenberg,
4.
Motion carries. Do we have a motion on waiver 2?
I make a motion that the Avon Plan Commission deny waiver 2 for DPR 22-16 Chick-fil-A, a waiver of Article 2.103A to allow for a 6-inch building articulation with a minimum of 3 feet required.
Do you have a second?
I'll second it.
Take a vote.
Excuse me, and this is to deny.
Correct. Right.
Captain Ranger,
4.
Jason Pike,
4.
Robert Vogt,
4.
Dave Copper,
4.
Charles Isaac, 4. Greg Zuzen,
4.
Paul Gutenberg,
4.
motion carries.
Do we have a motion on waiver 3? Which is the parking spaces waiver.
I make a motion that I move that the Avon Plan Commission deny waiver 3 for DPR 22-16 Chick-fil-A, a waiver of Article 6.11 D to provide for parking spaces with dimensions of 18 feet by 9 feet.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Captain Ranger,
Against?
Robert Vogt,
Against.
Jason Pike,
Against.
Dave Copper,
Against.
Charles Isaac,
Against.
Greg Zuzen,
Against.
Paul Gutenberg,
4.
I make a motion, the planning commission approve waiver of section 6.11.d to provide for parking spaces with dimensions of 18 feet by 9 feet.
Second.
Captain Ranger,
4.
Robert Vogt,
4.
Jason Pike,
4.
Dave Copper,
4.
Charles Isaac, 4. Greg Zuzen,
4.
Paul Gutenberg,
Against.
Do we have a motion for waiver 4, which is to, which addresses the landscape islands?
I feel like these go hand in hand. If
they didn't have the last one, this one wouldn't matter. So I'll make a motion that we approve, the planning commission approve waiver of section 6.11.g to provide for landscape islands of 102 square feet and 5.2 feet in width.
We have a second?
Second.
Heather Andrews,
4.
Robert Vogt,
4.
Mason Pike,
4.
Dave Gottman,
4.
Harold Isaac, 4. Greg Dixon,
4.
Todd Glutenberger,
4.
Motion carries. Do we have a motion on waiver 5?
I'll make it. I move that the Avon Plan Commission approve waiver 5 for DPR 2216 Chick-fil-A, a waiver of Article 6.11A to allow light trespass of 0.6 foot candles at the property line.
Second?
I'll second.
Catherine Andrews,
4.
Robert Vogt,
4.
Mason Pike,
4.
Dave Gottman,
4.
Harold Isaac, 4. Greg Dixon,
4.
Todd Glutenberger,
4.
So we have had approval of 4 out of 5 waivers. However, because they have not all been approved, we cannot go forward with the motion to approve the DPR, correct?
still want to vote on it, correct?
Dan?
Dan, what do you think that the option is here?
Yeah, one option you have is to approve the DPR with a condition that the plans be brought into conformance on the issue of articulation. That would be my suggestion. You could make that a condition, and therefore it would go to staff to make sure that condition is met at the time of permitting. But that's your other option, as I see it.
Does the condition allow for flexibility, allow for staff to exercise flexibility with the petitioner on the articulation?
Well, not with the standard. It'll have to be the required articulation. It'll have to meet this. It'll have to meet the ordinance.
By the letter.
Right.
If we wanted to move forward and give staff and the petitioner some flexibility, what would be your recommendation there, Dan?
Well, the option in that respect, I suppose, would be to see if you could get a commitment from the petitioner to, some compromise articulation that is acceptable to, because what was offered was really, or the waiver requested was a 6-inch articulation. The standard is 3 feet. Perhaps there's some middle ground there that could be treated as a commitment.
Is the petitioner willing to consider a condition?
I think probably the best thing is that we revise the plan and we either meet the standard and the planning department signs off because it meets the standard. And I guess if we don't, then we have to come back with a new waiver request. And perhaps at that time, staff is supportive, depending on how close we are.
So you would like to see us move forward on this, on the motion tonight with the condition?
With a condition, if that condition makes sense to the planning commission.
And that condition is either that the staff and the petitioner will work collaboratively until an agreement is reached, or to the letter of the ordinance.
And it would have to be to the letter.
It would have to be, I think, to the letter, and if we don't meet the letter, then it's got to be a waiver that comes back to you, in my opinion.
We would assume the waiver would be different
Yeah,
from the
because I
waiver
think
that was
it's,
here
yeah,
today.
I think it's a public I think it's a UDO requirement.
Right.
And, you know, if we're really close next time, but not there, then perhaps you say you're close enough, but that'd be in the discretion of the plan commission.
That would be this purpose of the
Yeah.
waiver request.
I think so. I mean, I hate to drag everything back in here, but I don't know how to do it.
We've made a lot of progress tonight. So.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it, given the way the UDO is written in the procedure.
Yeah, I would suggest that the condition, I would suggest that the conditions say, I would suggest the conditions say that the plans be revised to meet the requirements of the UDO in terms of articulation. And I don't think you need to say any more than that.
Okay. Robert, do you want to, you're a pro at this.
Yeah, I will make a motion that we approve DPR 22-16 with the following condition. Dan, it's a condition, correct? It's not a commitment, it's a condition.
Right. Yeah, it wouldn't be a commitment.
It would be a commitment?
No, it wouldn't
No.
be a commitment.
Thank you. I was getting a yes from him and okay. We approve DPR 22-16 with the following condition that it meets the standards of the UDO regarding articulation.
So real quick, there's those other three we need to add.
Forgive me. Let me add the additional requirements. Forgive me. Where are we at here?
How about you just start from the top?
Number one, any revised plans must comply with all commitments and conditions noted as part of any approval granted. Number two, a landscape bond is required per section 4-9 of the zoning ordinance. This bond must be provided to the town of Avon prior to the issuance of a full COA for the subject site. And number three, the development shall comply with all the relevant portions of the subdivision control and ordinance and the town code. And comments by Public Works, the fire department, and Crossroads engineers at the pre-construction meeting.
Did you read the full first part of that? That full
No,
paragraph?
but I don't believe that's required because we're approving the DPR as a whole. Is that correct? Do I need to include this semi-paragraph in that motion?
Dan.
Sorry, you can't see that I'm looking at you, Dan. Forgive me.
No, but I have the staff report, so.
If I'll go ahead and add this. I move that the Avon Planning Commission approves DPR 2216 Chick-fil-A at Beechwood Center, a request for approval of a DPR to allow for the construction of a 4,780 square foot Chick-fil-A restaurant subject to the following conditions. First, meet the standards of the UDO regarding articulation, along with the additional three that I mentioned a moment ago.
I'll second.
Four.
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 Motion carries. We have two more items on our agenda. I would remind petitioners and all participants that it is now 9:45 and we have time constraints. So let's try and move through this as quickly as possible. Mr. Peoples, next on the agenda.
Sure, I'm going to try. DPR 2217, Hendricks County Parks and Recreation. This is a request for approval of a development plan review petition to approve a maintenance facility along with basic infrastructure, driveway, parking area, and a dry pond with a waiver of the landscaping requirements of the Unified Development Ordinance. It's a 140-acre property located just west of Liberty Meadow Road and Gibbs Road, down in the southwest part of the town. So this is the site. It's literally in the southwest part of the town. It's part of the Gibbs Park that the county operates, which is located like right here, 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 and here. So this whole corner right here is the Gibbs Park. And what they intend to do is put a maintenance facility right here for the park. Property zoned agricultural. The area is dominated by agricultural and estate type developments out here, mostly architectural, but some estate estate developments. Currently, there is no maintenance facility at the park, and the Parks Department has to migrate their equipment and their personnel from other parks to this park to do routine maintenance for the park grounds. What they intend to do with this maintenance facility then is house the equipment for the maintenance of the park at the park so that they can attain some efficiencies in their operations, and they don't have to basically utilize a lot of their employee time driving vehicles and maintenance personnel to the park for long term for the maintenance of the park. Site is zoned to ag, and most of the area, like I said, is dominated with agricultural and estate type developments. The typical standards of the Unified Development Ordinances, such as the need to pave drives and parking areas, are not really applicable to this development because, one, it's in the AG zoning district, and so the use of gravel drives is a fairly standard use out in the agricultural areas. It is located in the rural area of the towns, and the proposed use of the building is a non-public accessory use for the overall function of the park. And so with these three things in combined, having a long gravel drive back to this and gravel and not necessarily a paved parking area is not a problematic thing. The request does include a waiver of our landscaping requirements of the ordinance, and as a public park, the area is largely left in a natural state. There is a fishing lake, and there's some trails and parking areas and stuff associated with the general operations of the park. But for the most part, it's left in its rural, natural state. And the existing landscaping in the park is routinely maintained and augmented by the park staff, which is frankly one of the reasons for this building to exist in the first place. There is an existing tree line that buffers the proposed location of the maintenance facilities from the adjoining single-family residential use to the west, and to the north, it's an agricultural farm field. This is an oblique photography of the area showing the existing landscaping along the western and northern property boundaries. This is a farm field, and this is the single-family residence that would be most affected. The location of the maintenance facility would be right about here. The next slide shows the drive that goes back to the maintenance facility, and then this shows the general post and frame construction of the proposed building. We do recommend approval of the waiver request. We think that obviously as a public park, there's sufficient landscaping overall in the park to compensate for the lack of landscaping around this maintenance building. And we do recommend approval of DPR 2217 with two of the three standard conditions and another one. Any revised plans must comply with the commitments and conditions noted as part of any approval granted. The development shall comply with all relevant portions of the town code. Comments by Public Works, Fire Department, Crossroads engineers at the time of the pre-construction meeting. And then the oddball curveball third one. Because of the location of this park, we have asked the park to actually name their private drive back to that, and we're going to address that maintenance facility off of that private drive and forward it to 911. It's just too remote from the existing street system for us to give it a street system. I think the park agrees with that. They just haven't supplied yet the street name for their private drive. With those, we do recommend approval, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Are you willing to offer up your name for the name of the street?
I would actually offer that my name not be used for any sort of streets.
People's Place.
I was just thinking that too.
Loera Boulevard.
Is it more common or uncommon for there to be a maintenance facility at a park?
Oh, it's relatively common. I mean, we've got one.
Yeah.
Right
And
over- right over
I can
there.
add, it's more than just convenience, and time. It's actually a safety issue for park staff.
Okay.
Just, I only know that from speaking
Just-
to my own park staff. I got your back. I'm from our own park staff here. It's a safety issue moving that equipment as well.
Yeah. Just asking questions. Any other questions for Mr. Peoples? If not, will the petitioner come forward?
Good evening. Ryan Limley, Superintendent of Hendricks County Parks, address 955 East Main Street, Danville. As you are aware, we opened W.S. Gibbs Memorial Park on July 21st of 21 of last year. Our current amenities occupy 68 acres. It's an 18-hole disc golf course, 2 reservable pavilions, 2 ponds totaling slightly over 5 acres. That is a consumptive fishery pond stocked by our friends at DNR. They stocked around 15,000 fish into those public fisheries. We do have a playground with a nature play trail, 2 miles of crushed stone trail. Current projects that we're working on right now are expanding our trail system an additional mile. We do have a large grant. We're waiting on an award from the federal government, but our friends at DNR have assisted with that. It will provide 2 modern restrooms, an ADA trail paved, an additional fishing pier on Pond 2, solar lights, and reforestation. Again, today we're asking for approval for the 60 by 120 maintenance hub. Currently, we are transporting our equipment from McLeod Nature Park, and we're working out of a box trailer, our maintenance team. So I give them kudos for getting phase 1 opened in a box trailer. The park is a huge success. I think it's improved quality of life for the town of Avon and also for Hendricks County. This will, if it's approved, improve efficiency, staff morale, and as you stated, eliminate and reduce health and safety concerns.
Okay,
Was that brief enough?
awesome. Questions for the petitioner?
This DPR does come with a waiver, the need of a waiver, landscaping.
Right, the landscaping standards of the ordinance.
Forgive me, I just wanted to point that out. I don't think that's a question for you. Sorry. I gotta say, we're surrounded by landscaping. I feel it's again meeting that spirit of the intent. It might not be meeting the specific letter of it, but it'll be meeting the spirit of that.
Well, and the fact that staff has no objections at all to this and is, as usual, written an excellent report explaining why this is a good idea has a lot of, carries a lot of weight with me. There's no further questions for the petitioner. Are there any questions from the public? Did anybody sign up to speak to this? Okay. Is anybody present who would like to speak to this agenda item? If not, we'll close public hearings. Discussion?
I'm supportive.
I think it makes sense. Particularly since it's also a safety issue, and we certainly don't want to be transporting expensive equipment on public streets from one park to another. So if there's no further discussion, do we have a motion?
Do we need to put People's Place in the motion? I'm
That is
kidding.
very tempting.
I'm
That is
kidding.
very tempting.
I'm kidding. I make a motion, the planning commission adopt waiver, approve a waiver of sections 6.1 to 6.9 of the UDO to forego the landscaping requirements of the ordinance.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Let's take a vote. 4.
Four.
4. Dave Cotton.
4.
Charles Tyson. 4. Greg Sue.
4.
4.
Motion carries.
Question, there were 3 things you had up there before.
I got it, yeah.
Do we need to add that? third
I
item?
wrote it. I can approve, I can do the motion. I move that the Avon Planning Commission approves DPR 2217 Hendricks City Parks and Recreation Maintenance Facility, a request for approval of a development plan review to allow for the construction of a maintenance facility along with basic infrastructure, driveway, parking area, and a dry pond, subject to the following conditions. One, any revised plans must comply with all commitments and conditions noted as part of any approval granted. The development will comply with all the relevant portions of the subdivision control ordinance and the town code, and comments by Public Works, the fire department, and Crossroads Engineering at the pre-construction meeting. The petitioner shall supply a street name for the private drive for addressing purposes.
Second.
Catherine Ransford,
4.
Howard Rowe,
4.
Jason Hyde, 4. Dave Kaufman,
4.
Harold Isaac, 4. Craig Reason,
4.
Bobby Murder,
4.
Motion carries. And we are now down to our last item. And I would express happiness at that, but I know what making that statement out loud does to, it's a curse. It's a jinx.
So this is ZA 2212, Home 2 Suites rezoning. This is a request for approval of a zone map amendment rezoning 2.4 acres from Hendricks County RB to the C2 zoning district. Property is located right here. Now, there's my staff report has, I think, includes this piece of property up here, but the property doesn't include that. It's right here, so that we had to amend the map in here to show you the correct location of the rezoning per the legal description. Yeah, it's this one and this one right here. It doesn't include this one up here, no. No, that one's already in the town and zone C2, this one down here. These two do have an annexation petition pending before them. So there's an annexation petition that has been filed and is pending before the town council on this petition. It's in Hendricks County, it's zoned RB. The RB zoning classification is roughly equivalent to our R2 zoning classification. It's a single-family residential zoning classification. And that just acknowledges the fact that the property is improved with a long-standing single-family residential use. This is a request to rezone that to the C3 zoning district for the construction of a hotel and to have perhaps an undeveloped lot for future commercial development. The plan doesn't have an overt recommendation for this particular site. When that happens, there are two options. One, the underlying zoning. Two, extending a nearby recommendation. It's likely, as you've seen in the zoning map, it's surrounded by commercial zoning on all three sides. You know, the general idea would be is that commercial probably ends somewhere up here. So these two lots are surrounded by C2 zoning on all of its sides. So it seems that retaining this site for single-family residential use is not appropriate. There is along the west here a large area that is planned for area retail. And the comprehensive plan does allow you to extend that recommendation across other properties if you need to. And so what the staff would argue is, in this particular case, extending that area retail to the east to encompass this site would be allowable, and then the request would be consistent with the plan's recommendation. Thoroughfare plan shows County Road 900 East as a collector. Collector Street, I'm sorry, is an arterial street. That's a mistake. It should be an arterial street. No, I'm sorry. That's right. It's a collector street. And that has a 100-foot right-of-way or a 50-foot half. And so what we would ask is a 50-foot half be dedicated with the administrative plat that's going to be necessary to consolidate these lots. And then finally, the ordinance does require a hotel exceeding 119 rooms to submit a traffic study. In this particular instance, they would need some variances to get to that threshold. And so by right, probably they'd be right around the 119 room threshold and wouldn't need a traffic study. But in the event that they exceed that study or exceed that threshold, we would ask that they be compelled to do the recommendations of the study as part of the development plan review petition.
Do we know how many rooms the Hampton Inn and the Fairfield Suites have?
I don't know. I'm sure we have it in the site plan, but I don't have it off the top of my head. This is the general layout of the site. It shows a conceptual plan here for a hotel here. The commercial outlet in the south. Now, the curveball on this one right here is this particular piece of property is owned by the neighborhood association here. It is owned commercially. So we're dealing with this area right here. But the town's preference is that this site be backloaded off of this street and not have direct access to County Road 900 East. Unfortunately, to do that, something's going to have to happen with this little strip of land that's part of that adjoining neighborhood. But that will be part of the development plan review petition. I only bring it up for your information as part of this petition.
I had that same question when we presented it at the town council for annexation. And the rumor is that the developer that owns that beige area wants it to be sold, but he may have issues trying to sell it to who for price, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess my question is, if we do this and it doesn't get annexed, does this rezoning go away then, or what happens?
Well, if it doesn't get annexed, then yeah, the rezoning doesn't exist because it's not in the town.
So they're moving parallel with each other then?
Right. And what we normally would do on this case is that the rezoning is typically heard first at the council, and then the annexation petition is heard second. So in the event that the rezoning petition is for some reason denied, the petitioner has the opportunity to withdraw the annexation petition. That's what we've historically done, or at least that's what I've told we've historically done on these cases.
That seems backwards to me.
Well, no, because a lot of times the annexation petitions, especially annexation in Avon, they want to get their zoning before. They don't want to get annexed first and then get the rezoning denied. So it's a way to give the petitioner some comfort that they have an option. You know what I'm saying? I know what you're saying is it's not in the town, so why is the council approving a rezoning when it's not in the town? And the idea is that the property owner doesn't want to be in the town unless it's a chicken and egg argument.
So it's a conditional rezoning.
Right. So if it's not annexed, then the rezoning simply goes away.
Okay.
Because it's not in the corporate limits of the town, so we don't have zoning authority over it anyway. But this gives the petitioner the opportunity to withdraw their annexation petition if they don't get their zoning.
And Greg, are you suggesting that that little strip is how does that little strip fall into the annexing, I guess?
Well, that's in the town.
That is in
That's
the
part of that. It's part of that neighborhood to the north.
Okay. So it's just the part where the hotel is proposed that.
Yeah. It's just these lots right here that are not.
That's very strange.
Catherine, if I could just add that the order of business that Bill talks about in terms of the rezoning going first and then the annexation, we should remember that the town is in no way obligated to treat the rezone request different because there's a possible annexation. We shouldn't consider that at all. We should just take the rezone on its face and take whatever action, ultimately town council need to take whatever action it deems appropriate on the rezone.
I guess my concern was that do we even have and I'm assuming that we do because we're doing this, but do we even have the authority to do a rezone on property that isn't in the town?
You do. We do. Number one, we have an agreement with the county that allows us to assume some jurisdiction in order to do exactly what we're doing here.
Okay.
The county is considered to that, but the matters, basically the rezone consideration and the annexation, final step, the annexation, in terms of an approval, are heard on the same night.
Gotcha.
I would just say, though, that, I think earlier there was a question asked about, well, why would we do it that way? Well, the town is not, in terms of the rezone, the annexation doesn't impact us at all. It's not like a deal has been made. And so, we could do it either way, but we respect petitioners when they say to us, well, if my rezoning doesn't get approved, I may not want to come into the town. That's certainly reasonable. But for purposes of the Plan Commission, I just think I'll tell the town council the same thing. We need to keep these things separate and not connect them or link them in any way.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Peoples?
Just at the end, it's, we do recommend that the Plan Commission forward a favorable recommendation on this particular petition of the town council, subject to commitments. That's a 50-foot half right-of-way dedication. And should the hotel ultimately exceed 119 rooms, traffic study shall be conducted, and the recommendations of the study is interpreted by the Public Works Director and/or the town manager shall be incorporated into the subsequent development plan as part of the DPR process. And I would be happy to answer any further questions that you have.
I think we asked our questions before you were finished, but are there any further questions for staff? If not, let the petitioner come forward.
Last time, I promise.
You're busy tonight.
Yeah, Joe Calderon, 11 South Meridian, Indianapolis, representing petitioner SHN LLC. They are also under the umbrella of MHG Hotels, which has a presence here in the town of Avon. I did not prepare a PowerPoint for this one. Simply because on its face, and first of all, the request is to C2. I think Bill may have said C3.
Did I say C3?
You may have. It's C2. It's okay. All the property in Eden Gate to the east is C2. The Costco development is C2. So this makes absolute sense. We're not extending the north boundary beyond what would be C2 to the east or west. So we think this is a very good rezoning. Now, we're well aware and we appreciate the council's comments. We don't want you to think about the site plan as it sits today. We've got access issues to worry about. We're not really going to get into that tonight, just because we have work to do in that regard. We just want you to consider the principle of whether or not it makes sense to zone two parcels comprised of 2.37 acres surrounded by C2 to the south, east, and west, whether that makes sense to you and meets the rezoning criteria set forth in the statute. We think it does, and we will be certainly working on the other issues in time to discuss with council. And certainly, obviously, we have to have all that put to bed by the time we bring back any sort of development plan. So with that, I'll conclude and answer any questions.
This is the home to suites, like long-term stay hotels type of facility that's being proposed?
No, I don't think it's long-term.
Or like people who are in town on projects and that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Extended stay, thank you.
It's like a residence inn.
Thank you.
It's got suites.
Yeah.
Kitchenette.
Okay. Any further questions for the petitioner? In that case, we'll open up to public hearing. Do we have anybody that signed up? Is there anybody in the room who would like to speak to this agenda item? If not, public hearing is closed. Discussion?
I think the staff has done a good job writing this up and going through the criteria, and I would agree with staff's assertion. And I think we ought to approve this recommendation, forward a favorable recommendation to the council.
Yeah, I'd agree with Paul. I'd find it really odd to have this any other zoning, truth be told. Just to look at it anything else would feel weird. It wouldn't feel
feel isn't the right word I'm looking for, neither is weird. It wouldn't flow, it wouldn't be good city plan, it would be inconsistent, that is the word I'm looking for, thank you, Mason. It would be inconsistent and just would not be good, so I agree with Paul. Thanks, Mason.
I concur with both of you. Is there any further discussion, or do we have a motion?
I move that the Avon plan. I move that the Avon Plan Commission forward a favorable recommendation for ZA 22-12 Home to Suites, a request to rezone approximately 2.4 acres from Hendricks County zoning RB to C2 to allow for the construction of a hotel subject to the following conditions. 1, a 50-foot right-of-way shall be dedicated along County Road 900 East with an administrative play consolidating the properties. And 2, should the hotel exceed 119 rooms, a traffic study shall be conducted, and the recommendations of that study as interpreted by the Public Works Director and/or Town Manager shall be incorporated into the subsequent development plan as part of the DPR process.
I'll second.
Let's vote.
Catherine Ramsey,
4.
Mason Pike,
4.
Dave Kaufman,
4.
Robert Post,
4.
Greg Booth,
4.
Paul Gutenberg.
4.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other business that needs to be attended to?
I would just add, I think if we could, we mentioned this last time, but if we can get that language added to your opening statement about time to remind.
That's an excellent idea.
I forgot, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's an excellent idea.
I should have done that already.
Do we have any committee reports? I know there was no BZA committee.
I would like to share one thing, but I want to go back to that. I want to add to that. I would recommend, we didn't have that problem tonight. We didn't have a lot of public hearings. We didn't have a lot of remonstrance. But I'd recommend for staff to put in the presentation the 5 criteria and the president to speak to that when calling the public hearing. Remember that those 5 criteria are the requirement that we have to look at. Make sure that their questions, their comments are focusing on it. I think it's just something we talked about in training. Just
I think it
again,
would also be a good idea to have, I don't know if we can do this or not, but can we put a timer up on the, like a 2-minute timer or something?
Paul had it going early. He just.
I'm
He had the horn set too.
gonna
Pardon
use.
me, hang on. Still got this going on. And I wanted to share with you guys the zoning amendment. It's not Glen Rock Springs. What was the other one? The one previously recommended an unfavorable recommendation from this planning commission expired
Siskin
today.
Pines.
Not Cityscape, Siskin Pines.
Siskin Pines.
Expired today, so this body's action went into effect. That zoning amendment was denied effectively. It did not need to come to us. They did not ask to put it on our agenda, so the time limit expired today. It's kind of a pat on your back. You guys are the ones that made that call. So there you go. That was all I had.
Commission reports, BZA did not meet. Any other commission reports? Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? In that case, we are adjourned.